Hey, Vince, well done. We do have quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Toronto Transit Commission Board Meeting number 2015. Before we get started on our official agenda, I would just ask if people could please stand just for a moment as they are able. And we're standing for a moment of silence as we remember Tom Deddes, our TTC colleague Tom, who died on Monday, October 9th, after suffering a critical workplace injury on October 1st. Tom was just 50 years old and gave 18 years of his life to serving the traveling public of Toronto, working in the closely knit family of track workers. Tom will be greatly missed by all of his TTC friends and colleagues, and certainly our thoughts today are with Tom's family, and we'll ensure that Tom, of course, is never forgotten at the TTC. And with that, I'll just ask for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. So on to other agenda, the agenda in front of us. We already this morning went through declarations of interest, and there were none, and we approved the minutes of the previous meeting, and there was no business arising out of those minutes. There will be deputations on some items, and we'll hold those. I'll suggest that we go through all the items now, hold what we want to speak to, or where there are deputations, and knock some items off. So starting with item number 1, I will hold that, the CEO's report, and I'll hold number 2, which are the ACAT minutes, so our ACAT chair can introduce those. We have presentations on items number 3, 4, and 5, so those will be held. Item number 6, we have deputations. Item number 7, we have deputations. Item number 8, Toronto York Spadina Subway Extension Procurement Authorization Amendment. Moved by Commissioner Lalonde, the staff recommendations, all in favor, that carries. Item number 9 is a TYSSC on-call miscellaneous service procurement authorization amendment. Moved by Commissioner Byers, all in favor, that carries. Item number 10, if I could have someone move the actions taken in camera by Commissioner Lalonde, all in favor, that carries. Item number 11, any public discussion? The actions taken in camera moved by Commissioner De Laurentiis, all in favor, that carries. Item number 12, consolidated warehouse strategy. Any public comments? The actions taken in camera will be moved by Commissioner Crisanti. All in favor? That carries. Item number 13, materials and procurement warehouse lease authorization. A motion by Commissioner DeBaremaker to adopt the actions taken in camera. All in favor? All opposed? That carries. Item number 14. Do we have depths on that? No. Item number 14, Commissioner DeBaremaker will move the actions taken in camera. All in favor? That carries. Number 15, I'll hold that item, and there's depths anyways. Number 16, one-person train operation procurement authorization amendment. Okay. Staff recommendation moved by Commissioner, was there a hold call there? Oh no, moved by Commissioner Byers. All in favor? That carries. Subway public washroom cleaning contract procurement authorization. Hold by Commissioner, is that a hold? Hold by Commissioner Mahevik. Number 18 is supply of subway parts procurement authorization. Any questions of staff? Move approval by Commissioner Mahevik. All in favor? No opposed. That carries. Number 19 is making Wellesley Station accessible. Moved by Commissioner Mahevik. All in favor? That carries. Number 20, miscellaneous design services procurement authorization. Moved by Commissioner Campbell. All in favor?
I was all over that.
Yeah, I know. Your enthusiasm is contagious. That carries. Item number 21 is TTC radio antenna lease renewals. Moved by Commissioner Lalonde. All in favor? That carries. People were looking forward to a robust debate on that one.
That was courageous.
Item number 22, Bill 142, Construction Lien Amendment Act.
Okay, I'll move that.
Vice Chair Heisey moves staff recommendations. All in favor? That carries. Item 23, appointment of the TTC Pension Fund Society Directors, moved by Vice Chair Heisey. All in favor? That carries. Just so everyone following along here and at home are aware, that leaves us with items number 1, Chief Executive Officer's Report, number 2, ACAT minutes, 3, a presentation from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, 4, a presentation on City of Toronto Real Estate, 5, the King Street Pilot, 6, the Auditor General's Report, 7, the Auditor General's Report, number 15, advancing fair integration, and number 17, subway public washroom cleaning contracts. So with that, we will move to item number 1, and I'll ask the CEO to give some highlights of his report, and then we'll move to questions of staff.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And first up, Chair, thank you for that moment's silence. I mean, obviously, Tom Deedy's death really has hit the organisation hard. One thing I was proud of was the way that we respected the family at the funeral, and it was very good of the Chair, yourself, and for Commissioner de Beermaker to come along to the funeral. That was much appreciated by the family, and I attended the event afterwards, and they really were very appreciative of the turnout the TTC gave and the dignity and the respect that was shown. Obviously, the big priority now is to get to the bottom of what exactly happened, and so there are a number of investigations ongoing, including the investigation with the Ministry of Labour. So we will keep the board apprised as that investigation continues. On to the specifics of the report. The performance data within the report relate or take us up to August of 2017, but the performance data on the scorecard is Q2 data. So you've seen that before. When we are ready, we will break that performance data down. When we get to have the granular data for Q3, we will, as we've done before, give you a detailed presentation to say what we think these stats are actually telling us. But obviously, if you've got some specifics about the months that have ensued or the periods that have ensued since the last update, my team are ready to answer those. I'll kick off, if I may, with the Toronto-York-Spadina subway extension, the TYSSE. You heard me say earlier, but just for the record, now that we're in public session, that will open 62 days from today. 5 out of 6 stations are now substantially complete. There's one that remains to be finished. 3 of the stations, as of this morning, we have occupancy of 3 stations. We already had York University and Downsview Park. We now have occupancy of Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, so that's good news because that's another thing finished in the glide path to getting the subway extension open, and that now means that Ellen Stassen, who's the GSM for the TYSSE, she and her team are actually undergoing training now at the stations, and a lot of the training's generic, so as long as the staff have been trained on how to use the equipment, that translates across to the other stations. In parallel, we're doing ATC testing up there. We've got trains running up and down, and we're testing the automatic train control equipment. We have all of the Presto equipment installed now, bar the what are called full service vending machines, so we're still working with Metrolinx to get that fixed. We're really into testing and commissioning, which I previously briefed you. It should not be underestimated. There you test literally and commission every individual piece of equipment. You then test it again within a station, and then you test and commission it as a system. So that in itself is a big operation. That then moves straight into trial operations, where Mike has control of the railway, and we literally test and train all of our employees to make sure that we've trialed different operations and operational scenarios. We've been rekeying the stations to take them out of the constructor's ownership to rekey them to TYSSE keys. Then we are in parallel putting together the safety case, which is a pyramid, and will ultimately result in my signature to sign to say that the TYSSE is safe to open. So 62 days, just under 9 weeks, seems like a long time, but it isn't really. There's a lot to do, but we are really now on the glide path to getting that open, and I know that people will be very, very impressed when they see that new system open. So that's, if you like, the positive news. The slightly less positive news, and you're aware of this, is the fact that now Bombardier have announced that there is a further delay to our streetcar order, which is immensely frustrating, where they had solemnly promised us that they would have 70 cars in service by the end of the year. That has been reined in to 65. We currently have 45, so another 20 to come, and they have cited production line and particularly supply chain difficulties as a reason for that further slippage. So rest assured, we are not at all happy about that. There's been a further robust debate with them. The legal process continues with Bombardier, and we continue to hold their feet to the fire. They have confirmed to me that the end date still has not slipped of 204 vehicles by the end of 2019, but obviously with every slippage, that challenge gets ever harder. They feel that they've got a potential to make it up with some additional capacity that they're going to bring online, but very disappointing. I'm sure you'll have some questions on that. I think those were the main points I wanted to make, other than on that same point, just make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Oh, just one thing I should say is another milestone of TYSSE modernization. All stations are now Wi-Fi equipped. The last one was York Mills, where we had to remove some asbestos. That's been done, and all stations are now Wi-Fi equipped for stations. The TYSSE, of course, comes Wi-Fi equipped. In fact, will be cell service equipped for people who use Freedom Mobile. The only other point, or two other points were, number one, we will report at the next meeting, or failing that, the December meeting, the latest CSS data. I've seen the CSS emerging scores, and again, we've scored very highly, so we're maintaining a high level of customer satisfaction. I would cite, and slightly stealing Debbie's thunder, the excellent accessibility forum, which I'll say no more on, other than that it was excellent, and it was great to share the stage with Debbie and her ACAT colleagues at that, on that event. And then the only other point I would make is go back to Bombardier, because I would like to segue on to Rick, my deputy, the Chief Service Officer, to do a quick presentation on a positive note, improvements we've made to bus service, but on a less positive note, on the downside of these ongoing delays to Bombardier delivery. So that's the linkage. The fact that we don't have the right number of new vehicles in service is putting increasing pressure on both the now very old existing streetcar fleet, but also on our bus fleet. And we felt that it was only right that we should show you what we're doing to mitigate that, but also so that we're clear in public session, full transparency, what the impact is on our bus fleet. So Rick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andy. Through you, Mr. Chair. At the last board meeting, I presented a few slides and discussed system performance for both streetcar and bus delivery. At that time, it was very much a high-level overview, and I'm going to get a little bit more granular today. Today I have a short presentation showing a few specific routes at a glance, and I'll show you, more importantly, how the improved reliability positively impacts our customers' concerns. I'm going to start by showing you the improvements made to our Route 60 Steeles West service. Steeles West is a 40-kilometer route operating through 5 wards and carrying approximately 30,000 customers per day. And as shown on the slide above, modified schedules will help us improve our on-time performance by nearly 20 points this year over the previous 2 years. Again, with a short turn slide. In addition, the second slide shows a reduction in short turns on Route 60 by 80%, 2015 to 2017. The next slide outlines our customer service comments called into the TTC call center. And as you can see, in the top 5 categories of customer concerns, the number of complaints have dropped significantly 2016 to 2017. The second slide shows you our Route 7 Bathurst service. This route is 30 kilometers in length, operated through 7 wards, and carries 26,000 customers per day. And as can be seen in the slide above, performance has improved 30 points over this year over the previous 2. Approximately 80% of our vehicles now leave their scheduled endpoint as publicly advertised. As for short turns, this year we've seen a 91% reduction in short turns as compared to 2015. In 3 of the 5 customer concern categories, we've seen significant reductions in complaints. As for the increase in discourtesy, we know that 75% of those are a result of fear enforcement by operators. Although in some cases, I would tell you that we do get complaints about operators not trying to enforce fares. We continue to train our operators in their responsibility of fare collecting. They're taught to collect fares, educate customers of the proper fare, and to report fare evasion. We currently have an operator recertification program underway, and over the next 14 months, all operators will have training addressing defensive driving, customer service and ADOD training, and fare collection. Much emphasis is placed on de-escalation of issues. More recently, in an effort to support our operators, our special constables have been riding our bus routes and speaking with operators at garages in areas about where operators are having problems collecting fares. The last route I'll show you is Route 63 Ossington service. This is a 21-kilometer route operating through 3 wards and carrying 22,000 customers per day. As you can see, we've seen a 25-point increase in on-time performance, a 71% reduction in short turns over 2 years, and lastly, 4 of the 5 customer service concern categories have seen reductions in complaints. Again, the fare collection is the issue when it comes to discourtesy. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, but I thought it was important that I show you a little granular level of the work being done behind the scenes, because there's a lot of staff working real hard to try to improve our service and the experience to our customers. That concludes this presentation.
And Rick, want to talk about the impact on fleet, so maybe just take the pause there, Chair, if you're happy. He'll come on to talk about Bombardier and the impact on the fleet, that's service performance.
So why don't we have him keep going, and then we'll just do questions for any matter, then the CEO's report after that. So go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on last month's discussion about bus procurements, this presentation is providing an overview of both the bus and streetcar fleets. First, I'll start with the bus fleet. We currently have over 1,900 buses in our fleet operating out of 7 bus garages. The chart above shows by year 2013 to 2021 the maximum number of buses that either operated out of or intend to operate in service daily, future budget permitting. Typically, the maximum number of buses operate during morning rush hour. In 2015, we reduced the number of buses in service in an effort to build our spare ratio and initiate maintenance reliability programs. The success of the programs will be demonstrated in an upcoming slide. A number of key initiatives are identified on the slide that will improve bus operations' ability to provide future service. First, with the opening of TYSSC later this year, buses are able to be reallocated for growth without increasing the fleet size. In 2018, Markham Road facility, next to our Melbourne garage, provides new storage for buses. In mid-2020, the new McNichol garage opens, accommodating storage for 250 buses, 220 of which will come from garages currently over capacity. And finally, with the opening of the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, additional buses will again be reallocated for growth without the need to increase the fleet size. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to highlight some of the few challenges or opportunities that this fleet faces over the coming years. First, I'm going to start by showing you the chart that's a snapshot of today of the number of buses in our fleet and the age of the buses. And as you can see, and what I'll do is I'll work right to left, 159 buses are due to be replaced this year and 118 next year, and so on. One thing that stands out is the 408 buses that were purchased 9 years ago, and that was purchased with the Ontario Bus Replacement Program funds. And as much as everyone in the industry strives to achieve a steady state procurement, no one turns down funding opportunities like the one that happened 9 years ago, or like the one that the Government of Canada presents us today through PTIF. With the influx of new vehicles and the success of the preventive maintenance programs, fewer vehicles are taken out of service daily, negatively impacting our customers. Just a few years ago, it wasn't uncommon for 100-plus buses to come out of service daily due to maintenance issues. Today, that number is in the range of 40. 60 more vehicles today stay in service as compared to just 18 months ago. This improvement is the result of a new thinking, additional funding, and a renewed effort towards preventive maintenance. And as you can see through the trend line, we're headed towards our goal of 1.5% of peak pullout. And this just recognizes that we know with the complexities of the environment we work in that something always happens. So the question becomes, what are we replacing with the buses we currently have in procurement? And literally, as outlined on this chart, you can see what our intention is to replace. And even with all the buses that are coming in, we still face some challenges in upcoming years. In 2020 and 2021 and 2022, we still have a significant number of buses to replace, over 500. In addition to this challenge, we will be required to initiate an order in the upcoming year. Now I'm going to touch on streetcar. The chart above displays the current age or the profile of the streetcar fleet as it exists today. Despite attempts to extend the life and improve reliability, streetcars continue to fail in service while others are decommissioned as they deemed unrepairable. And the actual life of these streetcars at original purchase was 30 years. And we have streetcars that is 37 and 38 years old. This is what the streetcar fleet would have looked like if we had had all the new streetcars as we had previously scheduled. And you can imagine with the old streetcars in place, what it's doing, how it's impacting our service. What I actually want to do is show you. As you expect, streetcar change-offs have been increasing, and despite renewed efforts to maintain and overhaul our CLRV and our ALRV fleets, the 2017 trend line confirms the negative impact on our service. Daily, 10 to 12% of our fleet is negatively impacting service due to equipment failures. The last slide I'll show shows the reliance on buses to supplement streetcar routes has been increasing. This is because we've had to significantly reduce the number of streetcar pullouts due to poor vehicle conditions. And I can assure you staff will continue to do everything possible in an effort to assist Bombardier in the delivery of new streetcars. Just in closing, in November, we'll be returning to the board with a green bus report, and we will present a set of recommendations that achieve the following. We'll look to mitigate the risk of the aging bus fleet using improved technology that also significantly reduces greenhouse gases. We're going to look to mitigate the temporary but significant risk of our aging streetcar fleet, and we look to maximize the use of PTIF funding. With that concludes my presentation, if there's any questions.
Great, so we'll do questions of staff on the CEO's report as written and read, Andy's comments or Rick's presentation, starting with Vice Chair Heise and then Mihevik and Byers.
Mike, could you tell me how, Rick, sorry. Can you tell me how we are going to manage 400 buses that are 9 years old now? And I understand the optimal life for service is 12. That's the maximum you'd like to see, right?
Correct.
So in 3 years, how are you envisaging us addressing that with our other need to replace buses, which I guess will be funded by PTIF mostly? Is that how you're projecting it?
That's correct. We're actually looking at other opportunities with vendors to increase the number of PTIF vehicles that may be available to us in the industry.
Okay.
We'd like, and just to follow up with that, as you can see, in year 10, we still have 46 that will need to be replaced. So somehow what we'll do is over a 3-year time frame, try to smooth out that high number.
So do we have an idea as to where we're going to get the 400 buses from, or is that too soon?
It's too soon today, sir.
Okay. In terms of repairs to streetcars, how do you assess when you have to bring a vehicle up to operable, safe service levels? Given that we don't expect some of these vehicles to be on the road very much longer, does that affect the extent of repairs that we're doing, and does that further compromise reliability?
What I would tell you is, although you see a high number of older vehicles still in the fleet, a good deal of those are being used as spare parts to make decent vehicles. At the intent of this year, early this year, we intended to retire about 28 Cs. We're actually looking by the end of this year to retire 55 Cs. So that number is dropping.
Okay, Commissioner Mihevik?
With the big question, and I know I'm beating a dead horse, but I want to beat it some more. I noticed that our overall customer trips are still below target. Is there any deeper understanding as to why that might be? I want to link it to buses in a minute, but are there any other reasons why one would not look at the buses as a part of this, and the lack of Bombardier performance and maybe even our own?
Well, I'll start, if I may. I don't think there's any definite linkage to that, Commissioner. We previously, and I guess I sound like a broken record, we previously talked about the fact that ridership is a challenge in most North American properties, but we're not complacent about that. We are looking to, as we previously advised you, bring forward the ridership growth standards or strategy to, it's either the next meeting or the December meeting, in order to aggressively address this issue. So to actually just take a series of actions ranging from less intrusive to very expensive but dramatic changes to get people to come out of their cars and get onto the TTC. But if there was a silver bullet, we'd have told you about that before.
I might be wrong, but is it not the case that most properties that experienced a flatlining or a decline experienced it for a one-year basis? Ours are now 3 years in a booming economy. So, we are kind of, I'm trying to first establish that as a fact, that we are actually going counter-cyclically. The economy is going like this. We've had a little bit of a dip. Well, most properties have had a bit of a dip, but ours has been flat for a few years. And then I just want to establish that as a fact.
So I can't confirm that as a fact. That yes, what you tend to see is a lag between the economy and ridership. But to your earlier point about are we bucking the trend? No, we're not. The main other North American properties are very similar to us, with the exception of places like Vancouver, where huge expenditure has been made to radically increase the service offer. So just about every other major US and Canadian property has suffered a similar softening in ridership, same as us, over the same period.
Okay. I want to turn your attention to CEO, or maybe Rick. I showed Rick this over the lunch hour. My concern is amount of service that is out there. And frankly, I have a hypothesis, untested, that really it's about the service that we're putting out there or not putting out there. And if you look at page 5 at the bottom, we're okay on the subway. We can't put more service on until we get automatic train control. We're going to do that later. That's in a good place. There was a challenge there. I think we have met the challenge. On the streetcars, we are not meeting the challenge, but that's not on us. Instead of our target of 22,000 hours of service, we are at 17, and that's what, something like a 20, maybe even a little higher than a 20% hours less of service than is our target. That's a pretty major number, it seems to me. And I would, ask for your comment on whether the hypothesis that we simply ain't putting the service out on the streetcar side. That's not on us, and I get that, and Bombardier kind of wears that piece. But then when you look at the next one, it's bus, 142,000 hours of service, but our target is 145, which is less than, and if you consider that some of those buses are actually servicing streetcar routes, we're behind on the buses as well. And I'm wondering whether that does not account for a good piece of why our ridership isn't growing.
Well, I mean, Rick maybe should comment as well. I don't think that helps, but as you've just heard, one, we've taken steps, very successful steps, to keep buses on the road longer, so that, because if buses keep coming off the road, that's going to impact your service offer against target. But the fact that we've driven up mean distance stream failure from 6,000 to whatever the latest figure is, it was up to around 18. Just 1 second. Where are we? Bus is now up to 12,000, I had it right. So that's one effort we're making. But the second factor is, you just heard from Rick, we have no choice but to substitute buses for streetcars because of the delay in the new streetcar order and the fact that the old streetcars are just falling apart. So there's undoubtedly, that is a factor, but I don't think that would in itself be the dominant factor behind the softening ridership. I think there are other factors at play, and they are the same factors as are being experienced across the not across North America as a whole.
Bottom line.
But it certainly doesn't
So we'll
help.
come back to you because you're over 5 minutes. You're at 6 for another round. Commissioner Byers.
So just, if you go back to your last slide there, I want to just make sure I understand how prepared we are. So you've projected forward to 2018, the streetcar decline and bus increase. Presumably, if you projected another year to 2019, the lines would continue in that direction, and let's make the very brave assumption for a moment that our friends at Bombardier will deliver, because only at 2019 it flatlines. But I guess my first question is, do we have enough buses to service the system and streetcar shortage based on, continued projection of those numbers on that graph?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to quantify something, the new vehicles, we have 46 on property, 44 have been accepted, and we typically get about 40 in service a day. Now, the new vehicles are longer than the Cs, almost twice as long, so we know that they carry increased capacity. So I don't anticipate, although I see the number going down, I don't anticipate the bus fleet coming and crossing and going above. The limiting factor for us is the number of buses today. The service hours available to provide buses exceeds the number of buses that are available to pull out every day. We have given direction to the managers of all the garages, both the operating and maintenance. Whenever a bus becomes available, we ask them to put it in service. If it means overtime, we put it in service. That's how we're managing this reduction in short turns is continuing. We work with the union on this, actually, with the runners-directed buses that they've given us the liberties to manage with their staff, to help us in that area.
Okay. And the increased costs that come with that service for our buses, presumably we're tracking these, and this will be part of our claim against Bombardier at that time.
I'll take that if I may, Rick. The legal costs are both LDs, liquidated damages, and I have instructed my team to maintain a ledger, whether or not we're successful, but to maintain a ledger of every additional cost that is attributable and can be legitimately linked back to this delay.
Got it.
Every single cost.
Thank you. Andy, in your report, page 11, paragraph 3, it's service performance, and you've got some very good metrics in terms of delay minutes down 21%, whole series of very good activity there, which is excellent. But on page 4, all the dots are red in terms of delay minutes. And is it fair to say that we had, so page 4, all those metrics for the subways are red to budget, but the actual year-over-year performance is very good? Were our targets kind of just too aggressive in hindsight, or is anything, because fundamentally our performance in 2011 or 2017 is actually very strong vis-a-vis 16
Sure. So I suspect Mike will want to add this. Don't forget what I said earlier. The scorecard figures are for Q2, but you're absolutely right. Year over year is what we're particularly looking at, rather than the fluctuations of periods and even quarters. But year over year, the stats that I quote on that page 11 are valid statistics. We did the math year over year, and I set my team a target in 2014 to cut delay minutes on all modes, actually, by 50% within 5 years, and we're on the glide path to do that. In terms of the actual targets, the one that is really unachievable is the trains per hour in AM peak with the existing signalling system. We could change it, but then we'll probably be accused of fiddling the figures. With hindsight, that one probably was unachievable until we get the new signalling system, in which case we'll up the target. Mike, did you want to add to that at all?
Thanks, Andy. I think just a couple of comments through the Chair, Commissioner. We're disappointed as well with the red crosses. As Andy pointed out, these are quarterly results. So at the next board meeting, we will show Q3, and a few of these will turn to green ticks. It doesn't reflect our service to date this year, where, you know, the reality is in the 9 months of this year compared to 2014, which was our baseline, we are around 20% down on the number of minutes delay that customers experience. And then the other thing I would say, that seems to be reflected in the CSS scores, which are a record high. So I think our customers, based on their last journey, agree with us that the service is improving across all bus, streetcar and subway. To address this quarterly thing, we're looking at adjusting some of these. So rather than show quarterly, we show the 12 periods of a year. So it's a little bit more granular and you can see the seasonal fluctuations. So you're not stuck with the same results for 3 consecutive board meetings. And some of the targets we would like to change to less than 100%. So pick up on Andy's point. If you do 25.5 trains per hour, the only way you can do that is by a perfect service on time, in turn, with no delays. And that just isn't going to happen. So I would like us to be able to set, you know, something like 24, 24 and a half as a sensible target, which is achievable and is still a reflection of capacity on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Fragadakis, any good questions?
Yes, I do. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't hear all of your questions because I came running in from another meeting, but we can talk about them later. Thanks. So it's good to see the numbers around short turns and hot cars. The other numbers for buses and streetcars, those X's are a little disconcerting. So I was wondering if there's a connection between those and being below target levels on operating and capital expenditures. And if not, can we expect better bus and streetcar performance numbers soon?
I wouldn't say that, well, I mean, in a way there is a direct correlation. Where you're operating a very old fleet, particularly on streetcars, I don't know if you caught the end of Rick's presentation, we'll take you through it separately. You know, the fact is, the old streetcars, the Cs and the As, are in some cases nearly 40 years old. They are wearing out, so they're still safe. We wouldn't run them if they weren't, but they are increasingly unreliable, so that definitely has a correlation back to the performance stats. And then conversely, the corollary of that, if you like, is that the more we renew the bus fleet, and to be fair, it's not just all about new purchase. The better we get at proactive maintenance, not just reactive. And Rick, one point I was going to ask you about was the hybrids. We've had a lot of trouble with our hybrid bus fleet, but bus maintenance have performed miracles on getting them sorted out. What's the latest figure for hybrids, Rick?
It's roughly 15,000 mean distance between failure, where the overall fleet's a little bit higher than that. They're running very well.
Which is unheard of. So it's a mixture of as we progressively renew our vehicle fleet with rocket trains that are now producing almost Asian standards of reliability in terms of mean distance between failure. So rocket last period was 647,000 kilometers between failure. New streetcars driving up that MDBF, new buses which are inherently more reliable, but also, to be fair to my team, just relentless work on proactive maintenance, e.g. with the hybrids, which people said were just garbage and we should get rid of, but we've made a lot of effort on making them work better. That's how we will progressively improve customer sat, and so you don't just have to wait for CapEx, is my point.
Okay. So on page 12 at the bottom, it says, I've asked the Chief Service Officer to prepare a presentation for the board that will show the increasing pressure that the late delivery of new vehicles combined with accelerated forced retirement of legacy streetcars is having on our bus fleet and on our ability to maintain service. As such, I need to emphasize to the board the need to continue to purchase of new buses to fill the gap left by the streetcar situation. So I was just wondering, when is that expected and will it be in time to take corrective action?
Rick, could you please comment? That was the 115. Just remind me where we are with that. Did you hear the question, though?
I'm sorry, you're talking about, like, just the presentation I just gave an overview of.
So the
number of
councillor
buses.
missed
I missed
that.
your present-
But what she's saying is where I made, and I deliberately included this on page 13, I said, as such, I need to emphasise to the board the need to continue purchase of buses, which was kind of code for, if you recall, board members, there was a deferral of the additional order, the over and above the Nova order that we made, which was the additional 115. Just remind me, Rick, where we are with that, because what I'm saying is, I don't think we can wait.
As part of the green bus report that'll be coming next month, I'll make some recommendations on purchasing that 115 as well, very likely others.
And that'll be in time to take any corrective action if necessary?
What do you mean corrective action to what?
Well, there's the pressure of the late delivery, and then combined with the forced retirement of legacy streetcars.
Okay. Whoops, it's a pity you didn't see the presentation. Why don't we
Yes, it
take
is.
you through that?
Sorry.
That's okay. We'll find a time to take you through it. We covered that in the presentation that unfortunately you missed.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I have
Yep.
one last
Yep.
question, and it's about Presto. So does the new software or gates mean that customers can get an update on their Presto card balance at most stations now? And maybe that was in the presentation, I apologize right now. It was.
Not on the gates themselves, but with the add value machine, you can tap on the machine and get your up-to-date balance. And progressively, we will be rolling out more add value machines. There will ultimately be one at every station. We're waiting for delivery from Metrolinx. They're under test right now.
Thank you. Again, my apologies.
No problem. Other questions from Commissioner De Laurentiis?
Andy, the car share services are expanding, and they're becoming much more popular. So in the ridership review that you're going to give us in November or December, will you be considering the extent to which there may be a cannibalization going on as a result of the car share services?
So I'll ask the Chief Customer Officer to respond to that point, please.
Yeah, on November, we'll bring the ridership growth strategy, and part of that strategy is we'll have a discussion about ridership and where we see where we're losing ridership and potential explanations for that. And the strategy, ideally, will link to those gaps. And so we do want to come back and talk about first mile, last mile. We won't be able to speak to it specifically in November, but it will be part of the work plan under the ridership growth strategy, which would include car share, bike share, walking, all of that stuff.
Other questions? Commissioner Campbell?
So just, the uptick of Presto usage doesn't seem to be on the same pace as it was before. I think we have 5.8 million journeys out of 30, it's like 14% usage so far. And were we not looking to, be completely 100% Presto by the end of next year?
Well, not quite, but let me ask Kirsten to answer that, because we're taking action now to drive up adoption.
What action?
Well, I'll ask Kirsten to speak to that, if I may.
Well, specifically in October, we've put the monthly pass, we put it on in September on Presto, and it's on in October, and the last numbers that I saw, we sold about 4,000 monthly passes on Presto, which is significantly higher than September. Then we'll move to the MDP, the monthly discount plan will happen in the new year, and with the machines that Andy was referring to, when all of the stations are enabled, where you'll be able to either check your balance or actually purchase a card. And similarly, we also have to work on LUMS, which is the single fare, allows for single fares, and that will be mid next year.
So is there any plan to do an incentive program to get people off of cash and tokens? Because cash and tokens cost us money, whereas Presto, although we pay a commission on Presto, it's more efficient.
Well, ultimately, you won't be able to use the token, so at some point next year, we will stop selling legacy fares, and then a short while thereafter, we will stop accepting legacy media. So things like tokens, for example, and Metro passes, because they'll have been migrated across. We are discussing with Metrolinx various incentive programs, but I guess the biggest incentive will be just ease of use, the fact that it will be a lot easier to purchase purchase a Presto card at a station via a full-service vending machine, via the expanded third-party network, which is going to be greatly expanded by the end of this year. So effectively, the choice will ultimately come down to cash or Presto, and the incentive will be the cheaper fare and the convenience that Presto affords with no need to line up.
Okay, that's it, thanks.
Great. Before we go back to Commissioner Mahevik, Sure. So we'll go to, we are doing a second round, so Vice Chair Heisey?
So actually, it's something I'd forgotten about, Rick. I just wondered what had happened with the increase in the bus service interval. We were going to implement, remember there was an auditor's report about how our service interval was much more frequent than comparable systems. As I recall, we did a pilot, and I just wondered where we were in that process. Anybody help me on that?
Are you talking about the service improvement?
I don't know what you call it, but the Auditor General about a year or two ago came out with a report that said that I'll just make up numbers, in Boston they changed the oil every 5,000 miles. In Toronto we did it every 3,000 miles. And we then implemented, I was told that we were going to do a trial of a reduced, a less frequent service interval that was more consistent with other big systems in North America for buses, and I wondered where that was at, or do I have that all, do I misunderstand?
Mr. Chair, actually, I do recall that at an audit committee meeting about 2 years ago, and it was talking about changing the intervals in which we do preventive maintenance. And we did move towards reducing some of that preventive maintenance that we had the discussion that day. For instance, we historically were doing reviews, it looks at preventive maintenance at 3,000 kilometers, where many others do it at wider intervals based on the age of the bus. So we have initiated that.
We done that on a pilot period, or we actually rolled it out system-wide now?
I'd have to get back to you on the specifics of it, but I know that we did take advantage of industry best practice when it came to that.
I'd just be interested in the follow-up maybe in the next CEO report, because it was a fairly big number, and I'd be interested where we're at. Thanks.
Commissioner Byers?
Yeah, just two quick ones. Number one, on page 47, you provided us with the fitness for duty update. We've had now a number of months, and it was interesting data. I mean, overall, 2.2% non-compliant on almost 1,000 tests, just under 25% alcohol versus drug. I was just curious whether you had a feeling of how things were going with this program. Is this expectations, where we sit, any feedback, how our union colleagues and, well, how our labor colleagues are reacting? Any color would be.
We're mindful that the union are here represented. So I would say that my view would be that we're vindicated in having introduced a policy because of the numbers of failures we've had, albeit, as I always say, and I'll say again for the public, the overwhelming majority of TTC staff would never dream of coming to the work under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Most of them are absolutely good as gold. However, the fact that we've had this number of failures is of concern, and so I'm pleased that we have this system in place, this random testing program in place, because it's designed to keep the members of the public, but also TTC workers safe. Having said that, obviously, the union has a different view, and the arbitration process is ongoing, and there is still an appeal against the imposition of this.
Good, thank you. Lastly, page 57, financial results. I know, good news, I mean, you have a deficit shortfall of over $30 million, and it appears that this is from, a ridership flat. You've been controlling expenses very well, so, want to say thank you and congratulations. There's anything, I don't know if there's anything, I read your comments there, but is there anything particular that's been done this year to lead to that positive performance?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, and Commissioner Mahevik here, in fact, he's just coming back in. Obviously, we don't want the ridership to be a factor, but we have, as in previous years, been very, very thrifty and careful in terms of expenditure. So discretionary expenditure is an ongoing focus for us, careful management of every line item. And that's credit to my team. They've continued to keep a focus on this, but not to the detriment of service or service reliability, or, of course, safety.
Other questions? Commissioners, last call. I just have one quick question about on the capital projects dashboard under the SAP update, that's schedule, cost, and scope has shifted kind of to the yellow warning signs. And I'm just, I guess, two things. I'm wondering what kind of we're looking to do to make sure that doesn't dip into red, and also wondering if the newly formed capital project working group will get a Presto update kind of at its inaugural meeting. Oh, sorry, I meant SAP, sorry.
I'm sure. So I think that's a good call. We'll be happy to do that. I mean, basically, same as with many big companies, it has proved immensely difficult, notwithstanding the blueprinting we did, to get to have an absolute smooth transition from what were 30-year-old legacy GL, General Ledger, HR, payrolls, and pension systems that you think you understand, but this is 1970s IT systems, to get that migrated across to SAP. So we will still go live with the first phase this year, which is, I always get it the wrong way around, which is payrolls. Then we're going to continue what the rest of Wave, I always say that, don't I? Pensions, I need to reprogram myself. So pensions will go live this year. Then we will finish off the remainder of the Wave ones in spring of next year. We are not, as you can clearly see on the scorecard, we have not breached the budget. We would not do that. But we have reset the project so that we go at a slightly slower pace with Wave 1, with Waves 2 through 6 still to come. Because we want to make sure that in pretty critical systems, like things like how you pay people and how you give them their pension, and for that matter, other HR critical systems, that when we go live, we're certain they'll work properly. Not unusual. Most companies struggle with that migration, but we'll take you through it in more detail at the new working group.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all of our questions. Anyone want to speak? Commissioner Mihevc?
Let me start with this by way of a compliment. Having, of course, over the years heard all kinds of complaints of, especially by women, of being harassed on the TTC. I think that picture of the chair and others there on This Is Where You Can Combat Harassment on the TTC, that was just excellent. I think that maybe credit is due to senior staff and the diverse mix that we have now at the senior level, so my hat's off to that. So on another issue, I continue to think very much that we have not been meeting the challenge of mobility in the City of Toronto for TTC and potential TTC riders. And as I've tried to dig deep into it, our ridership has been flat for 3 years. And when you dig deep into that number, I think it's on page 5, when you look at the streetcar piece and the bus piece and the service that is not being put out there, that's where I think it is at. And how I would explain it anecdotally, the last few times that I've been on the St. Clair streetcar, I've had to have one foot in between the two steps that take you down, because if you stand on the step, then the doors don't close, and then the other foot is on the second thing, and my bag is over my back. And of course, that's not the first streetcar, it's the third streetcar, because I've let two go by because it's kind of rude for a TTC commissioner to be kind of elbows up trying to get on the streetcar. I think we're leaving people at stations. And then they're making phone calls to the various Ubers and Lyfts of the world to get to where they need to go. Now, when I break that down and try to think, like, okay, where are our weaknesses there? Subways, I think we're meeting our target. Streetcars, it's not on us, it's on Bombardier, but we're pushing some buses over there. But when you look at the lack of buses that we have, and when Rick tells us that every single bus that we have that's available for service is out there, then that to me says we have a fleet problem. We have a fleet problem. We don't have enough buses in the system to manage the service that our city needs. Now, that's not a problem that's not a problem that, we can handle just with the flick of a switch. That was a problem 4-5 years ago when we didn't build the garages, when we didn't make the purchases expected for a rising population in a rising economy with more employment. So now I think we have to fix that. And I know they're coming forward with a plan next month or the month after that for a ridership growth strategy. I hope that it has a strong strategy around buying our 9th and 10th garage. I hope that it has a strong strategy around a bus purchase increments that assume a 3 or 4% ridership growth over a certain number of years. I hope that next month's report has an interim strategy so that for tomorrow or the next day that we're talking to York Region. Maybe they can pick up some of the lines that we're putting out into their area. Maybe there are other things we can do to not have as high a spare ratio so that those buses can be put into service. I think we have a big service problem out there. In my education around public transit, there are the three most important things for public transit are service, service, service. And it's second order, all the other things about on-time performance, customer satisfaction, cleanliness rate, they're all important, but it's second order. Number one is the amount of service that we put out there so that people can get to work and get to where they want to go. Sorry that sounded like a little bit of a rant, I guess it was. But I think that I look forward to that report next month or the month after that. I think the weakness is in the bus area, and I look forward to a very aggressive strategy on how we can meet that challenge that is before us. And we won't see the results of it. It'll be the next term of council will see the results of it in a major kind of way. But I think we need to step up to the plate this term for next term.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good to note that this commission and this board this term is in the midst of ordering 800 buses and building a bus garage, and it's a good start. So with that, any other speakers? Great. I'll move that we receive the report for information. All in favor? That carries. Item number 2, which is approval of the monthly ACAT minutes, and our ACAT chair is Debbie Adam-Mike. If you could just maybe introduce those minutes for us, that would be great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. I'm going to cover off 3 items today, and I will keep them very brief. We have the July 27th minutes, the August 31st minutes, and I would also like to address item number 5 on the agenda today, the King Street pilot, an observation on the part of ACAT. So bear with me, I will be brief. The July 27th minutes first. I'll start in reverse order because I usually start with design review, and I'm not being fair, so I'm going to move to Wheel-Trans this time and go in reverse order. In the July 27th minutes, the Wheel-Trans subcommittee reviewed the late cancellation and no-show policy. The late cancellation, for everyone's information, there are now a maximum of 8 points per month. The late cancellation deducts 1 point, and the no-show policy deducts 2 points per month. And these are now called, in user-friendly terms, life happens points. There was no communications subcommittee this month in July. The design review subcommittee reviewed the Eglinton Crosstown Caledonia Station, the Kiel Station elevator design, and the passenger assistance intercom initial review of the interface panel. Just a quick note of information for commissioners on the passenger assistance intercom review. Items in these panels include things like order of the buttons, is there enough contrast, consistency of the buttons, where does the emergency button go? You don't want people pressing it by accident when they really meant to press, the help or information buttons. We're hoping at some point we have harmonization between the cross-links intercom system and the TTC intercom systems, and we continue to work diligently in that regard. Service planning reviewed the Toronto Senior Strategy version 2.0 in July, and the 400 Lawrence Manor and the 404 East York Community Bus Pilot. Moving now to August 31st minutes. The Design Review Subcommittee expressed some concerns on the Keelsdale Station regarding the movement of passengers moving from crossing over to the second bus platform at that station. One of the issues was raised was that the second bus platform, you needed to cross the driveways to get to the second bus platform. This raises some safety concerns as well as doing this in inclement weather. The suggestion was made to make the sidewalks continuous, crossing the driveways, and it's just a matter of considering that sidewalk would be continuous across the driveways and between your road and Trethewey Drive. As an example, we currently have today the sidewalks at Davisville and Coxwell and Broadview as an example is where the sidewalk is treated as crossing a driveway, not a roadway. And, there are concerns for people wishing to make the crossing and knowing when it's safe to cross there. Those are concerns that we have. And design review. The last item in August design review of note is the installation of contrast granite flooring around the 26 remaining subway stations to assist people using tactile wayfinding to locate the fare gates. The Communications Subcommittee met in August and reviewed items of the Family of Services update and the community bus pilot, ensuring that the communications are understandable and usable, particularly when they deal with accessibility matters. And that's really what the communications subcommittee of ACAT deals primarily with with communications around accessibility. Service planning in August meeting reviewed the upcoming evacuation exercise that ACAT will be invited to observe. And we consulted on the TTC Accessibility Corporate Plan that report that comes out yearly. In Wheel-Trans, the Wheel-Trans Subcommittee reviewed the demo of the remote trip booking system for mobile devices, the mobile app, and some good comments were made on best use of that, and we're hoping that, we're looking forward to that. And they also reviewed the Family of Services update. As promised, my last item regarding, it refers to today's item on the agenda of item number 5. We noted in the report that it does address Wheel-Trans, but there is no mention in the report of streetcar accessibility and, accessing, lighting and boarding information. We'd like to see some statistical information on that in the report as well. And it also needs to focus as well on seniors. When we think about Wheel-Trans, we're not only talking about people with disabilities, and we tend to think of Wheel-Trans as serving that, but there are many people, particularly as the Family of Services pilot rolls out, that are beginning to use perhaps for the first time the conventional system. So we'd like to have some, more statistical data on the usage of from an accessibility point of view, on the King Street pilot. That concludes my remarks, Mr. Cole, and to the commissioners, and I thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With questions of staff? Sure, you can speak on the minutes, yep.
I'd like to briefly to express my thanks to Debbie and ACAT, and also my new friend Desrianne McKilrick. I experienced the TTC last Wednesday as a blind passenger. I had made an offer to ride the system months ago, and I was kind of relieved that there was no follow-up. But Debbie, in her efficiency, said, let's get this going. And so, once some temerity, I met Desrianne at St. Clair West Station and first put on a number of glasses to experience, portion of vision loss, but then the blindfold came on and the cane came out, and I, experienced the system that way, which was, I must say, a feeling of incredible vulnerability. And I can't tell you after that how much I admire and respect our ACAT members and disabled riders for the courage they have to be out there every day in the system. It's just extraordinary. And I guess the other insights were that and as Debbie's gone through, it's actually the little things that matter in our system and make it important. For example, location of signs, the lighting of signs, all these things that most of us take for granted when you're in a position like that, they are absolutely vital. And lastly, I'd say I think the TTC's done a tremendous job over the years of making disabilities and trends a priority. We just have to keep being absolutely relentless in doing that because it matters to this important rider group. And so, Debbie, I want to thank you and your ACAT members, Desrianne, for providing me with a profound experience, but also, showing us all how important your work is to the TTC. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'll take that as you also moving a receipt of the minutes, so thanks. All in favor? That carries. Item number 3, we have guests here presenting from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, speaking on the regional benefits of a major mobility hub at Toronto Pearson. Obviously, this would have an impact on the TTC, as if this were to come to pass, we would be serving this mobility hub, and so we've invited the GTAA here to present the concept to us, and I'm sure we can ask them lots of questions that come up. So I'll hand it over to
team at Toronto Pearson, the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, joined today by my colleagues Laurie McKee and Eileen Waiter. Apologies on behalf of Howard Eng, who's at a meeting of international airport CEOs, couldn't be here today, but he very much appreciated the opportunity to really talk about what's going on at Toronto Pearson in terms of this mobility center, this vision that we have, because like your organization, we're really in this business of moving people. And in our case, we're not only moving people around the region, but we're moving people from across the country. And when you think about what's going on in the region, we've all seen these growth statistics, population set to double, significant GDP benefits. Our role at Toronto Pearson in operating and managing the airport is to prepare for that growth and to think about how we're going to support the connectivity of passengers. About 70% of our, this year, 44.5 million passengers, going up to about 47 by the end of the year. How we're going to make sure that they can get efficiently and effectively to the airport from different points in the region, and then moving within the airport employment zone. So I want to talk to you a bit about that today. Pearson is, for those of you who don't follow our passenger growth statistics like we do, we're really growing at a significant clip. Last year alone, passenger numbers increased by about 8%. Expect to see the same this year. In terms of the annual average aircraft movements, it's really in line with the growth of the region itself. So while passenger numbers are getting bigger, the planes are getting bigger and carrying more passengers, and that's why you're not seeing that equivalent growth in terms of aircraft. What role is Pearson playing for the region and the world? Well, really, we're connecting our region and the country, because 1 in 5 Canadians who are traveling by air are traveling through Pearson. We're connecting them to the world. So about 70% of the world's economies can be reached through daily non-stop flights from Toronto Pearson. That's important when you're trying to attract big international head offices like Amazon to come to your jurisdiction. That connectivity is one of the main features of international airports around the world. Going to talk about that more in a minute. Exciting statistic for us is that amongst North American airports, we're now the second highest in terms of international passenger numbers. We're second only to JFK on that front. And so we have a lot to be proud of in terms of the airport, the type of airport Toronto Pearson has become. And 50% of the country's cargo is coming through this airport as well. What does that mean in terms of GDP benefits, job benefits? We have 49,000 people working at Toronto Pearson directly and 332,000 jobs facilitated by that airport. So that's about, when we did the studies, that's about 6% of the province's GDP is facilitated by the airport. Important economic catalyst. We get asked a lot about what's driving this growth because we are growing at a faster clip than the economy. In terms of the GDP. And really, what you would find is airports typically draw circles around themselves and contemplate what the potential catchment area for their services would be. And in the case of Toronto Pearson, our catchment area for a 3-hour drive time, that's what we would normally expect a local catchment area to be, a 3-hour drive time. It's about 12.5 million. And for flying times, you'd be connecting passengers within a 90-minute flight time, and that is 150 million potential passengers. Toronto Pearson is increasingly becoming a global connecting hub rather than just a domestic point-to-point service. And this is consistent with some of the world's largest airports. You can see them on this slide here. Los Angeles, New York, these are the ones in North America. Across Europe and into Asia, you'll see the common names that you're familiar with: Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Dubai. These are what we characterize as some of the top-tier international airports in the world. They have large passenger volumes, above 50 million passengers. Very high percentage of those passengers are international. Growing percentage of those passengers are also connecting through. Significant economic benefits attached to these airports, and we think Toronto Pearson is on the trajectory to become one of them. In fact, we'll probably be at 50 million passengers next year, if not the year after. So we stopped and asked ourselves, as we were preparing for this growth that's coming to the region, which we're required to support, what we would need to think about if we were truly to become one of these top-tier airports. And amongst the things, I mean, obviously you think about, can I get through the airport efficiently? Am I going to get held up in security screening or customs? But increasingly, transit has become something that airports, these large airports, are thinking more and more about. How to improve the connectivity and the mode split of passengers and workers in those areas who are using transit. And so we started to cast our minds to what we could do to really think about Pearson, not only in terms of providing for those passengers, providing for those workers, but also perhaps as a regional mobility center. So the Neptus Research Foundation did some research about key employment zones. You may have seen it. One of the key employment zones within the region that they found to be lacking in terms of transit service, higher order transit service, is the airport employment zone. They found that there are 1 million car trips each day to this area, and that over the course of 25 to 30 years, out to 2043, we're going to be seeing an increase in drive times from key areas around the region of about 25 to 35%. So when you look at the number of jobs in this employment zone, which is second only to downtown Toronto, and you think about the value of goods moving on the roads, I'll show you a slide in a second about that, and the fact that so much of the GDP is facilitated by the mobility in this area, we wanted to ask ourselves what we could do. What are other airports around the world doing? You can see some of these key choke points on the highways around the airport as well, whether it's the 401, the 427, up the 410, where there's a lot of cargo, a lot of goods moving, as well as passengers and workers. And so we asked ourselves what we could be doing differently. Additionally, there are a lot of priority neighborhoods that circle the airport area, and we recognize that any improvement in mobility, transit accessibility through the airport could also help to lift some of these neighborhoods, which we think is very important. So I talked about what other airports are doing. At Toronto Pearson, our mode split is about 10%. If I just took you back to 2006, our mode split would have only been about 1%. So we're heading in the right direction, but we know we have more to do when we look at the mode split achieved by other airports around the world. You see Shanghai, Hong Kong, obviously very high density, higher mode splits. But even when we look at Vancouver, YVR, they've got about a 30 to 40% mode split. And so we started to ask ourselves what we could be doing differently to lift the mode split at Pearson. You can see this is a slide of all the various public transit coming to Pearson today, whether it's the Up Express, which has been, a successful new chapter for Toronto Pearson in terms of lifting the mode split. I think we're about 6,800 in terms of airport ridership. And it's been growing year over year ever since the fare change, so we're quite pleased with that. But in addition, the heavily used routes would be across Florence and from Kipling Station as well. So 52 and 192, these are very popular routes for our passengers and more importantly for workers. When Howard Ang arrived at Pearson and he started to cast his mind to what the growth that was coming to the region would look like and what it would mean for the airport, he started to ask himself and challenge all of us, what were the transit connections that were coming to the airport? And really there were limited transit connections coming from different points in the region, but a number of them were planned. And I'm just going to flip ahead to this slide so that you can see, I know it's a convoluted slide, but some of the lines that were ringing the airport but not necessarily coming in that we think could be coming into the airport would include the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, the Eglinton West, Finch LRT, Mississauga Bus Rapid Transit, the RER, and the province has announced that it's going to study high-speed rail as well. So if we were to drop a dot in the middle of all of those lines and ask ourselves what's the potential to integrate or connect these lines, they all could connect potentially through Toronto Pearson and a mobility hub. And so what you're seeing here is our vision for how those lines might connect into Pearson and what are some of the key employment zones within the region that they could help to facilitate travel through. This concept of connecting these lines has had significant support from many of the employers, landowners, and institutions that are around the airport area. So whether it's, the Airport Corporate Center, you see that line of head offices across from the airport on the 401, Woodbine, Humber, they've all come together with the airport to form the Airport Employment Zone Coalition and to advocate for greater transit accessibility into this area. For our part, we're committed to building a regional transit center at Pearson that could serve as this second mobility hub for the region. Other regions, by the time they got to our size in terms of population growth, they'd identified that second or third key transit terminus. And so we've really set our sights on potentially providing that, to the extent that we've already gone ahead and started to identify a site where we could build this transit center. It is on the north side of Airport Road, running parallel alongside of the 409. And what you can see here in this diagram is a view of Toronto Pearson in around 2043, 2037, when we may be supporting about 85 million passengers, depending on how the region needs us to grow. And you can see that the airport terminals themselves, people always ask us what happened to Terminal 2. Well, Terminal 2 is going to be this new transit/passenger processing center, which is the yellow and the light blue. And the south side, which are those white buildings, you see Terminal 1 and Terminal 3, they are going to potentially need to be reconfigured to support more gates. So it's a big vision, but you can see that that transit center on the north side of Airport Road is where we propose that all of these lines could potentially connect through, have good highway access. You would come in on transit, you'd check in at your check-in gate, you'd go through security screening, and then you'd go over to the secure side, which is the Terminal 1, Terminal 3. So that could potentially be our new Terminal 2. You know, what does that mean? That means that we've already issued an RFP to get on with planning this regional transit center, this passenger processing center. We've committed to funding this transit center ourselves, so that's in the order of $500 million. We're preparing to invest as an organization into this transit center, which we think is a significant contribution. These are the lines that we've identified that we think could come in. Of course, they require further study, but like I said, this will involve all of the ticketing, processing, links to the parking. There's a lot of planning underway in order to deliver this in and about 2027 is when we think this transit center will be ready. We're not the first airport to do this. I'm sure many of you have traveled to international airports like Schiphol or Hong Kong. You've probably experienced the seamless connectivity of coming off of your plane and within that same building, getting onto transit and going to key destinations around the region. Not only does this improve the passenger experience, it helps the region, it helps the employment zone around the airport and other employment areas within the vicinity of the airport. It lifts land values, it gives workers accessibility to transit. We think we can learn a lot from these other airports. We issued an RFP for this transit center. We're about to award it, hopefully before the end of the month. Get on with the planning I talked about. But now we come to how to study which connections should come into the airport. And as I mentioned earlier, we've identified 5 various transit lines that we think could come in. Some of them will take a much longer period of time to study, no doubt, high-speed rail, regional express rail to bring to fruition. But the others are on much shorter time frames. So you think about Mississauga Bus Rapid Transit, that's slated for the end of the year, I believe, early 2018. Eglinton Crosstown Finch, these are all transit lines that could come into Pearson, and we would very much like to partner with the province and the municipalities to study how they're going to connect. And in order to make sure that we have alignment with the development of this transit center, we want to get on with that as soon as possible. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have about what's going on at the airport.
Thank you very much. You do have some questions, starting with Vice Chair Heisey, and we'll go from there.
My first question is, I'm pleased, obviously, that you're doing this, and I think it's long overdue. But I guess, and this isn't a criticism of you undertaking the initiative, it's trying to understand how things happen. One of my concerns has been the jurisdictional vacuum in terms of regional planning. And I don't understand why, and I'm glad you're doing it, but why isn't Metrolinx doing this? Given that I thought they were the body that was sort of integrating all of us together, because I would have expected this idea or presentation from them, not from you. And do you have any comment on that?
If you go back to the last round of the Metrolinx, the Regional Transportation Plan, they had identified Pearson as a mobility hub, and in their most recent update, they've actually elevated the potential for a transit center located at the airport. They've been important partners to us, and you know, none of you are unfamiliar with how many stakeholders and how hard it takes to push a large transportation infrastructure asset ahead. This is something that we all need to support and participate in. So I think they are involved, and we're working with them.
Okay. My next question is, how can you reconcile the airport's revenue model, which I understand is landing fees, number one source of revenue. This is what I've been told. Number two, parking revenue. And number three, fees from taxis and Uber. So if you have a revenue model that requires you to get monies in that way, doesn't that disincentivize the airport to encourage transit to the airport? Don't you need a new revenue model?
So, no, not at all.
Okay.
We're growing significantly. We do, the number one source of revenue, as you point out, would be aeronautical revenue, followed by non-aeronautical revenue, which would include parking and sponsorships, retail.
Okay.
We are a not-for-profit. The growth in passenger volumes is contributing significantly to our revenue, and we're able to pay down significant amount of debts and look to a future in which we'll have paid down the debt. I mean, it is a requirement of our ground lease to have that debt paid down before we return the airport to the federal government at the end of our lease.
So you don't see you don't see there a problem with the revenue model that puts a lot of emphasis on parking revenue?
No, parking revenue has been going down at the airport, and our expectation is that in order to continue to grow as we are and support the movement of passengers to the airport, we're going to need to plan for transit.
Last question. This is today, transit today. I go to Pearson a couple of times a year, and perversely, I enjoy taking the 192 bus. But I can tell you, it's not easy to find from some of the terminals that the signage is not encouraging use. So could you tell this board if the airport has any plans to improve internal directional signage at Pearson to get people to the 192 bus?
So just last year, we updated the transit center within the terminal and put in significant wayfinding to support it, as well as a much better passenger transit user experience within the ground transportation center itself. We recognize that if we're going to increase the mode split, we have to keep improving that experience, and so we're now doing it at Terminal 3 as well. The wayfinding signage is something that the team has worked on significantly over the last year.
So when did that new signage come in play?
I believe we did a tour with members of the executive back in the spring of last year, and it was already in place. It would have been 12 months ago.
Okay, maybe I'm not current, but my experience of the airport is it's not emphasized. I can find a limo and a taxi through signage very easily, but my experience of the airport, it's much harder to find the bus. But that's not your view of it, no?
Well, clearly, if you're continuing to have that experience, we'd want to address that.
Commissioner Fragadakis with questions.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. So back in 2014, the Toronto Star reported that Metrolinx has agreed to pay about $1.85 per rider on the new airport train to the GTAA to cover lost parking revenue. I'm just wondering, are you still charging Metrolinx that fee? And if so, did you decrease it when Metrolinx cut the UPX fares?
We never did charge the fee. It was dropped. There is no passenger fee charged by the GTAA on Up Express.
Oh. Good to hear.
The Star wrote a story about that.
Oh, I read the one story, I didn't read the other one. It's hard to keep up in the world of news.
Written by Tess Kalinowski.
Oh, okay. So how, I was going to ask about how well does that mess with the city of Mississauga's plans for public transit, but that kind of is irrelevant.
Okay.
Good to know.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Crisanti has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming out today and taking the leadership on this great initiative. I could tell you, Etobicoke North residents are really thrilled to know that this is coming. I've had many discussions with them with respect to having this type of transit connection that's so vital to getting people moving around the city in a very effective way. So what discussions have you had with Metrolinx with respect to the Finch West LRT? As you know, right now it's currently slated to terminate at Humber College. And of course, what we need to do is extend that down to Woodbine, and then from Woodbine to the airport. And of course, we're going to need a new station at Woodbine as well. So what discussions have you had? How are those discussions progressing at your end? Or have you had those discussions?
Well, we've had preliminary discussions with Metrolinx, with the City of Toronto, City of Mississauga, the Ministry of Transportation, you name it. If they'll sit and listen to us, we'll talk to them about it. And it's been identified as one of the 5 priority lines that we'd like to study in terms of those hub connections. Getting the alignment and understanding the opportunity to bring the Finch LRT down into this transit hub while we're still in these preliminary design phases is very important. You know, what the timing is on when it goes ahead. Obviously, there's a large workforce that could potentially use that line to come into this airport employment zone, but getting on with the studies, and I think one of you had raised this jurisdictional challenge that we face, because it is airport land, it is federal land, it sits in the middle of 2 municipalities, it's adjacent to Brampton, so really overcoming those, you know, multi-jurisdictional challenges and getting everybody at the same table is what we're currently trying to address with the help of the province.
Okay. And on the Eglinton Crosstown, so I guess you'll be studying all those 5 connections you just showed on the last slide.
Yes.
So when, and how long would the study go, how long would it take to have the study come back?
Well, I think each of those lines represents different planning challenges in and of themselves, so I won't even start to venture towards HSR or RER, but in terms of the timeframes for Mississauga Bus Rapid Transit, Eglinton Crosstown, Finch LRT, we think it could take as much as 2.5 years to study and do the ridership, the alignment, the business case, and we're really anxious to get on with that with the support of the municipalities and the various planning authorities, and also to help support the funding of those studies.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Byers with questions.
Another question on the numbers. So the airports with very high mode shares, Heathrow, Hong Kong, Schiphol, others, are you aware of whether, I mean, as you know, transit doesn't pay all the operating costs in the fare box?
No.
In those airports where the mode share is much higher than it is in Toronto, do those airports contribute to the operating or capital costs, to the operating in particular costs of transit in those cities? Do you know?
I believe in, so I can't speak for all of them, but I believe in the case of Heathrow or Vancouver even, there was some contribution by the airport towards the capital costs, but not the operating. I'd have to go back and take a closer look at the operating costs.
Is it, you'd mentioned 500 million, is that, are those costs counting on contributions from other levels of government as part of that, or is there any contribution contemplated by the GTAA for operating costs of the transit systems, the lines you had on the page there?
So at this point, the 500 million is the cost to deliver the first phase of that transit center located at Pearson. We're going to fund that through our own means. So we're not looking to any other level of government to support that. We're going to deliver that on behalf of the airport. On the other lines, you know, what we've said is, in terms of those hub connections, as the studies progress and we see the potential opportunity, the airport is willing to explore different scenarios in which it could help to play a role.
Okay, I think that makes sense, because every passenger delivered to GTAA is part of the revenue source there, whereas it's part of our costs.
Yes.
And so there's got to be a sharing of kind of mutual benefit, if you will.
Got it. That would be on the capital. So in terms of operating, that's something we'd have to explore further.
Yes.
I think that's what you're asking specifically.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I don't think I have the pay grade to commit to operating.
So it's empowerment. You could do it on your boss's.
I think that's called policy on the fly.
Commissioner Mihevc with questions.
I think most of them have been asked, and, you know, first, I'm very supportive of this. I think we all are.
Thank you.
How will you pay for the $500 million cost? And I think the public wants to know, where does privatization fit into that?
Well,
And if I could be
sure. So
biased
let's
here,
just
preferably
let's get to that and get it off the table. So the airport is an asset that's owned by the people of Canada, and the federal government, for those who don't know or aren't aware, has announced that, well, it hasn't announced, but it is undertaking a review of business models. So we've remained neutral. Like we said, are open to exploring any of the opportunities to deliver our vision for the for the airport as an international hub, as well as that transit center. But I don't believe any decision has been made. They have not indicated to us that any decision's been made. So there's so many models around the world, truth be told. I challenge most of us to think of airports that are private and what that model looks like, whether it's full sale of land, a concession. We actually operate under a concession model today. So there's so many permutations, I can't really, we've refrained from getting involved in that discussion at this point.
Thank you.
Other questions? Just one quick one from me. Both Commissioner Mihevc and I have mused and even moved a motion here at the Commission to look at the concept of connecting a Finch LRT and a Eglinton Crosstown West LRT either through the airport campus somewhere, whether it's near a terminal or at the hub you're talking about. We will, at the TTC, I know, do some of that analysis. Would that concept be part of the work that you would imagine doing in the kind of, okay.
Yes, very helpful.
And do you think that is, I mean, maybe it's too early to say, is that connectivity or that looping of those two lines, knowing what your kind of the lay of the land is quite literally out there on your campus, is that something that could be feasible?
Yes, a looping of those two lines would provide significant benefits, not only for the employment zone, but for many of the communities around the airport, including those priority neighborhoods, and creating greater access in the northwest corner of the city.
Okay. Great, thank you. Well, thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing more about this work as it progresses. Thank you. Motion to receive this for information by Commissioner Crisanti. All in favor? That carries. Brings us to item number 4, which is City of Toronto real estate update on the citywide real estate transformation.
Get you set up here, David. You just need to arrow through there. Thanks. Thank you.
Great, welcome, and go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here today to present to you an update on the citywide real estate review. My name is David Jollymore. I'm the program director for the citywide real estate transformation. I'm part of the City of Toronto, and I'm here with my colleague Pam Kraft, who's the head of real estate at the TTC. So just a couple of agenda items for today. I'm going to provide an update on the transformation itself, and then I'm going to talk about a report that just got adopted by council at the last council meeting. So just in terms of a couple of words of history, we've been on this journey of reviewing and transforming the real estate service delivery model for about 2 years. So we were directed by council in 2015 to go ahead and look at the way that the city provides real estate service delivery across all the divisions, agencies, and corporations. We undertook a review with the help of Deloitte, and we brought our first report in July of 2016. And the recommendation at that point in time and the direction from council was that we undertook a centralization of the service delivery. We didn't say how we're going to go about centralizing the model, and that was the next report. So we undertook the implementation strategy planning and brought forward a report just this past May to council, whereby we presented the service delivery model, and we got approval for the implementation. So I'm going to give you a sense for some of the key activities that are currently underway, leading to our startup of the model January the 1st, 2018. So council approved in June 2017 the appointment of an interim board of directors. And the interim board of directors has a fairly tight mandate. We were starting the process to recruit the CEO. That board was supporting the operationalizing the model by January the 1st, 2018, and looking at transitioning current business of Build Toronto and Toronto Port Lands Corporation. We just reported to Executive Committee and to Council a report whereby we consolidate the authority framework relative to real estate matters, and we align those authorities under the new model. A to-do for us as we start up the operational of the new model in January of 2018 is to bring forward an MOU between the agency and the city, which we'll bring forward to Council in the first quarter of 2018. And one of the key mandates of the model in the first year is to bring forward the citywide real estate strategy for Council approval in the first quarter of 2019. And also to report on how we've made out in the first year of operation. So in terms of some of the key transitional milestones, so some of these read in the past because some of them are actually done. So we brought forward our delegated authority framework to Executive Committee, and we had that adopted at Executive Committee, and it came forward to Council and it was adopted. I'm going to talk a bit more of the details of that coming up in a slide in a minute. We've just named an interim CEO transition lead who is now in place. And that person's name is Antoinette Tumalillo. She has 30 years of experience in the real estate industry, and she's been involved in several major transformations. So she has a mandate to work with the transition team to get the model prepared, up and running for January the 1st, 2018. So one of the key items that's currently underway is the organizational build-out, and TRA is the real estate agency. So we're in the process of building out the new organization, and we expect to announce that to staff in October or this month actually, October 2017. Appointment of a city division interim real estate services director. So Joe Casali, who's currently the City of Toronto's Real Estate Services Director. He is going to be taking a position in the model on the agency side, and I'm actually going to be taking his place as the Real Estate Service Delivery Director on an interim basis for the first year of the model being in operation. We are underway in terms of the recruitment of the permanent board of directors. And just as a reminder, it's a 9-person board, 6 private citizen members, one of whom is a private citizen, and 3 members of council. So we have the nominating panel for corporations that's undertaking interviews at the end of this month, and the striking committee meeting at the end of this month. 2 reports coming forward to council in November naming those 9 new permanent board members. We'll undertake some onboarding and some educational sessions leading up to them coming into effect January the 1st, 2018. And we've retained the services of Odgers Bernston, and they've been helping us in terms of the recruitment and appointment of the permanent CEO. So we have the interim CEO / transition lead who is in place, and we'll hand the baton to the permanent CEO. We expect to have a short list of candidates that we can hand to the permanent board when they come into place in January, and it'll take some weeks to interview prospective CEOs, and we hope to have that person in place by or during the second quarter, at least by the end of second quarter. This is a very detailed chart. So basically, we wanted to show the model and how we're operationalizing it. On the left-hand side of the chart is the new agency. The new agency is being formed with the consolidation of Build Toronto and the Toronto Portlands Corporation. We've named the interim CEO transition lead, that's Antoinette Tumalillo. And we've named a combination of city people, Build Toronto people, and TPLC people in the agency to help us complete the work to get the model ready and to start operations on January the 1st, 2018. Key functions that exist within the agency side, a focus on long-term planning and working closely with the programs through our client relationship management function and framework, creation of the long-term strategy and the asset management strategy, and development of major projects as it relates to vertical infrastructure. So anything related to building or lands that's not related to infrastructure would be under the mandate of this new model. On the right-hand side is the city proper. There's been some changes in the organization since we sent our slides in. Chief Corporate Officer position has been eliminated. That is now replaced with the Deputy City Manager of Internal Corporate Services. Real estate services and facilities management as key functions of the model report into the Deputy City Manager, Internal Corporate Services, who's Josie Shuley. I'm taking on the real estate services division, and Sunil Sharma leads the facilities management functions. On the city proper side, the key functions are focused on transactional related matters and day-to-day activities. Just moving on. So in terms of the idea of the new model, it's really about adding value and supporting programs. So really from the program perspective, what's in it for the programs? Well, we want to free up the programs to be able to focus on their core business activities. We expect as we bring together various different members of the real estate community on a citywide basis, and we add new talent to the model, that the programs will have access to a full-service real estate advisory and delivery model and can provide support and guidance to the programs and support their real estate needs. And the client relationship management function is of key importance in this new model. And the CRM would be a key advocate of the program and ensuring that the model is executing and serving the needs of the program as it conducts its business. From a community and resident impacts perspective, really the idea here is about planning through a citywide lens. So how do we make the best, how do we get the most out of our most valuable asset, our real estate assets, while meeting all the various different needs of the programs? Greater connections to other programs. So certainly there's opportunities, and we can speak through a couple of examples where there's been good collaboration between the programs to solution, whether that's office space needs, warehousing needs, or other needs, but through a citywide lens. And access to board and industry expertise. So our agency does have a board of directors. It does include 6 members of private citizens who bring specific expertise, and we expect to have a well-rounded board in terms of real estate skills and community building skills as we put that group together. The report that we just brought forward to council at the last council meeting, basically what we expected to do, this was a follow-up to the report that we brought forward in May when we brought forward our new model. Basically, what we wanted to do was consolidate all the current authorities associated with real estate service delivery under the new model. And, you know, I think there's, as we kind of looked at the current state of various different authorities that existed, we had a hodgepodge of various different council directions, municipal code chapters, and other directions or practices or precedents that have been set from the past whereby various different groups were involved in service, real estate service delivery. So we brought forward our report. It got adopted, widely adopted at City Council on October the 2nd. And now we're working very closely in collaboration with the programs to ensure that as we make changes to these authorities that we don't have any adverse impacts to the operations. Just to give you a sense for the state that we had prior to the report that we brought forward, we have 24 divisions, agencies, and corporations involved in real estate activities. That could be acquisitions of properties, that could be engaging in a lease, or that could be engaged in capital improvement of a piece of land or a building. Really, the lack of centralization of these authorities would really impede our ability to enable the new model that we're bringing forward. And we really are focused with these authority changes on the core real estate. So that includes things like sales of lands, leasing of property, acquisitions, and development. During the 3-year incubation period, so we expect to start up the model January the 1st. We expect to incubate it over a 3-year period, and we expect to work with programs to assume more activities over that period of time where it makes sense. On the right-hand side, you can see a list of all the various different groups that have a part to play in terms of real estate service delivery. So what we brought forward in the Q3 report, really, we wanted to clean up all the current authorities associated with real estate service delivery. The city enjoys a delegated authority framework for all intents and purposes. That delegated authority framework remains the same. That provides that the city, without running to council every time we need to do a transaction within specific financial limits, is staff can work together to transact the business. That supports the ability of the business to conduct itself. Really why it's changing, we want to improve the coordination and collaboration between groups. We want to drive consistency in approach to real estate service delivery. And really, we want to understand what real estate business we're running as a city, inclusive of all the divisions, agencies, and corporations. So as I mentioned, our report that we brought forward was really a technical report which talks about principles associated with making chapter code changes, and now we're working very closely with the programs to make sure that we do it correctly and we don't impact operations as we do so and roll out the new model.
Great, thank you very much. Questions? I guess my question, maybe that would be on behalf of everyone, is in as simplest terms as possible, what does this mean for this board and decision-making on real estate issues?
So I think as far as staff is concerned, I think and this has started, and I would say in the last 2-3 quarters or even longer, I think what it really drives is for staff to come together and to collaborate on real estate solutions, right? So whether that's a consolidation of a corporate office, renewals of leases relative to office space, if we're looking at a warehouse consolidation,
Or maybe I'll give you an example. Commissioner Mahevig mentioned bus garages. You know, we've got to be more aggressive on that. So in 2021, we determined that we identify a site and we want to acquire that to be a future bus garage. Is that acquisition and the X amount of millions of dollars that have to be put forward being made at this board, or is that being made by City Council?
So we recently had that situation happen with the 1810 Markham purchase, at which case I see it unfolding exactly as it had that time, and David can express his thoughts on that, where we worked with the city, a site was found, we reviewed the location with the city, we came to the board for the recommendation to ask the city to purchase it on our behalf. The city did the paperwork on the actual purchase. We worked very closely with the city through the due diligence period to make sure that everything was handled. They had their environmental due diligence, we had our environmental due diligence. We worked very, very well, and we closed on the property within the last few weeks.
How about a scenario where the city, call it the city real estate or this new entity, does not think the location we have identified is the right price or location or opportunity?
Yeah. So a couple of comments. I think, as I mentioned, in the first year that we bring up this model, the key output is getting together the strategic plan with all the inputs from all the various different projects. I think that the new model has to be very careful in terms of delving into program requirements. So the program defines their requirements from an operational perspective, and I think that the lens that this model applies is the citywide lens. So the program identifies its need in terms of a location for a warehouse as an example, which meets their operational performance requirements in terms of warehousing needs or other operational needs. I think the lens that this model applies is there a bigger citywide play that could come into play here as it enables the TTC to get its warehouse.
Great. Questions from Commissioner De Laurentiis?
Mr. Chairman, your question made me think of this, and that is, how do we define real estate? Does it expand to include an actual subway station?
Again, that's something, especially as we start out this new model, we have to be very careful what we bite off here. And what we've agreed with the program is that there's some cases that are very cut and dry. So an office building that has nothing to do with the infrastructure of providing the service, that one's pretty cut and dry. That would be a collaboration between the new model and the TTC program. I think as far as infrastructure is concerned, that one is a little bit, I would say, more in the gray area. Certainly as far as anything that's impacting the transit infrastructure, there would need to be, there could never be a case where we weren't coming together and collaborating and agreeing on what the future holds for that particular part of the real estate. But I'll tell you, within the first year, there's going to be, focus will be on, things like office space and other kind of straightforward cases, I would say.
Great, thank you. So with that, anyone to speak to this item? We'll move, Commissioner Byers will move the staff recommendations. All in favor? That carries. If you don't mind accommodating me, I would ask if we could, and the deputant on the number 5 King Street pilot item is okay with this, if we could move to the number 6 now, which is the Auditor General's report on the review of the complaint regarding the June 29th briefing note. Is that okay with board members? I know there are deputants here for that. So this is item number 6, the AG's report, and on the list of deputations is Rosemary Fry and Brenda Thompson, if they're here.
Give me a second to set up, please.
Welcome.
Thank you. You start looking for this.
Oh, sorry about that. And whenever you're ready, I'll start your time.
Busy tweeting. I haven't gotten this ready yet. Okay. Right.
I will start your time now. Go ahead.
So I'm Rosemary Frey, and I'm the person who initiated the complaint. And I have a mic here. So it says in the section 1781 of the City of Toronto Act that the Auditor General is responsible for assisting City Council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds and for achievement of value for money in city operations. But interestingly, the Auditor General and her team used only very narrow parameters to look at our complaint. And even though value for money assessment is a huge part of the job, as we see in this definition, they didn't do one on this multi-billion-dollar one-stop subway. And we asked explicitly for one at our request. But the report only says that they may do one in the future. And the report also says, quote, "It is not the Auditor General's role to question the policy decision of elected officials, nor is it the Auditor General's role to reopen City Council decisions," unquote. But that's not anywhere in the City of Toronto Act, at least not the versions that are on the city's websites. But the thing is, Auditors General are appointed by City Council, including the mayor. So this obviously can, in some cases, make things tricky for them. But you know what? I managed to find a variant version of the Auditor General's roles in the City of Toronto Act, and this version helps them not piss off their political masters. It includes the barring of Auditors General from peskily poking their noses into politicians' policy decisions. And this intriguing document also has a variant definition of the Auditor General's responsibilities. It starts out with the regular wording that the Auditor General is responsible for assisting City Council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for value for money and quality of stewardship. But then it adds something important, except when it comes to the mayor's election promise projects, even if billions and billions of dollars are at stake. Right there. So that explains a lot. For example, back in January, when Scarborough Transaction and I took our complaint first to the Ombudsman of Toronto, Susan Opler, but she refused to investigate. She told us with a straight face that it wasn't within her jurisdiction, and she punted our complaint quickly to the Auditor General. So then it was in the Auditor General's court. And we met in late April with an investigator hired by the Auditor General to start working on the investigation. And very interestingly, the investigator told us that Andy Byford wanted the report made public when it was completed, whatever the findings. And the investigator also asked us whether we'd accept the report. But we told him that our responses depended on what the report contained. I mean, how could we know months in advance whether the investigation would be thorough and well conducted? Then in July, the mayor also asked me, well, would I accept the report? And I've got that on Twitter, on video. And now, sure enough, we found that the Auditor General's team did not do a value for money analysis. They didn't even analyze all the contents of our briefing note, even though it was short, and they had 8 months. They took 8 months to do their investigation and to put out the report. And they completely exonerated Byford and Mayor John Tory, and the report also said there was no politicization of the process. But I guess that's kind of the way it is going at all levels of government these days, and it's not personal to us. Toronto Star City Hall reporter Jennifer Pagliaro recently had her one-year-old request refused by the Information Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. Pagliaro had asked for information on how discussions about how the city will pay to operate the Scarborough subway. She wanted information on these discussions. And the Privacy Commissioner even censored part of their response to her. And Jennifer tweeted, quote, "We currently have no insight into how much it will cost to operate a 6-kilometer extension or what taxpayers will have to subsidize." And quote, "Two levels of government and a watchdog have so far made it clear they really don't want us, that is, the public, to know." But, what the heck, what's a few $1 billion? It's fine to give a blank check for a one-stop subway. We've got lots of money to spare in this city, clearly, in this province, in this country. But you know what? We don't. The TTC and all other city agencies, except, of course, the sacrosanct police and fire services, are having to cut and cut and cut. And in the final analysis, this is more than about one subway. This is about residents' rights and democracy, and whether in the coming months and years we'll have money for what we really need. It's about the powerful versus the people, and the people will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No, thank you very much for coming. Next on the list is Brenda Thompson. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Chairman Cole, Mr. Byford. My name is Brenda Thompson. Before making specific comments on the Auditor General's report, I'd just like to state what Scarborough Transit Action stands for. And I'd like you to just think about it, because I think it's not really that different from what you all believe in. We stand for a TTC-delivered, owned and operated network in Scarborough, including the Scarborough, the Shepherd, and the Eglinton East LRTs. And in fighting for more transit riders now, we've been met with accusations of using poison pens, exploding cigars. We've been accused of being racist, of committing sabotage. And there's been a pattern by the Mayor's office, and even to a certain extent, the Auditor General's office, to delay or defer what should have already taken place as part of the transit planning process. And that is a side-by-side comparison of the Scarborough SRT, LRT, and one-stop subway. That's part of a good transit planning process, to have a base case that's based on the existing reality of what you have. And we have yet to see that happen. Therefore, we find it unacceptable that the scope of the Auditor General's report is limited to the briefing note. Some of our questions have been answered, but the broader, more important question that would justify spending $3.56 billion for a one-stop subway still has no answer. The City of Toronto Act states that the Auditor General is responsible for assisting City Council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds and for achievement of value for money in city operations. Why are we still waiting for a value for money analysis? Although the Auditor General found no lack of integrity on the part of the TTC, no political interference on the part of the Mayor's office, we have always known that the purpose of the briefing note was to bolster the pro-subway argument. As a result of the Auditor General's investigation, we now know that the construction of the LRT could begin in 2018, not 2021, and that the cost could be as low as $1.9 billion. One of the questions we sought to answer was, who requested the briefing note? And the Auditor General responded. She said, by saying, any councillor can request a briefing note. Making a request to staff for a briefing note is not considered political interference. And so my response to that is, if any councillor can request a briefing note on any topic, any councillor like Councillor Mihevik or Councillor Fragedakis could request a briefing note from staff on the ridership projections of the Scarborough subway and whether it would require a subsidy or not. They could have that briefing note ready just before the next vote on the Scarborough subway and also let TTC staff know they were distributing it, but inadvertently distribute it to some, but not to others, and that would not be considered political interference. Although it's encouraging that any councillor can make a request for a briefing note, we wonder why Mr. Byford refused to say who had requested the briefing note when he was asked by Star reporter Jennifer Pagliaro. This aroused suspicion and gave the impression that Mr. Byford could have been under pressure from the mayor's office to keep it a secret. Finally, as most but not all of you are democratically elected members of this commission, will you ensure that the Auditor General completes a value for money analysis of the Scarborough subway extension as soon as possible? Transit riders have waited too long already. We need to get back to sensible transit planning. We could start building a Scarborough LRT in 2018, and I think it deserves an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No, thank you for coming. I'll bring it, we'll go to now questions of staff or the Auditor General who's here to answer questions. Maybe if the Auditor General, please welcome. I think you have a few questions from Commissioner de Beermaker.
You guys change chairs there. Thank you. Gotta move this out. There we go.
Thank you, Commissioners. The role of the Auditor General is quite different than...
Do we want a presentation or questions? Just, okay, so we'll go to questions, straight to questions? Okay. Okay. Maybe, sir, is it, maybe I feel you're burning a bit to make one statement at least, and then on the roll, and then we'll go to questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah, I don't think we want the full presentation, but
no problem.
That would be good.
The first is clarity in our role. Council has been elected by the people of Toronto. It is for them to determine the direction of transit. Management provides advice in the course of briefing notes, studies, and they also are responsible to implement what the direction of council. My role is to make sure on behalf of council and on behalf of this board to make sure management implements the direction of council in a cost-effective manner. I don't substitute my opinion for the opinions of the elected body. I make sure that their direction is implemented properly and in a cost-effective manner. I just want to give a little background and introduce my colleagues in relation to this study. When we commenced this study, I understood that it was a study that there was a lot of public debate. So in addition to myself, I'm a qualified lawyer, I'm certified in forensic accounting, and I'm also a CPA. I hired Ken Frace. So Ken's firm, Ken is a forensic investigator. He was the person, his team, his firm, was the group that followed the money in the MFP inquiry. He provides expert evidence to court on police matters, public matters, and private matters. He's well known in the community. He's one of the largest and independent forensic firms in Canada. He led the investigation. Sean McIntosh, he is a senior investigator in my office. He was a risk and management consultant, and he worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers prior to that. So between the three of us, we've all come to the same conclusion on this matter. The conclusion is that there may have been mistakes when preparing the briefing note. There may have been things that could have been done better, but there is absolutely no deliberate and erroneous misleading of council. And that was the allegation. It's a very serious allegation.
Great. Thank you very much for setting the context, and we'll go to Commissioner de Beermaker for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for coming in today and writing such a thorough report. I guess my first set of questions will be around like you, I think a very serious allegation, and it's quoted, I think, on page 24 of your report, allegations about staff being politicized by preparing a briefing note. And the accusation, I guess that maybe spurred your investigation, was, I'll call it an accusation or a statement, and it's in quotes here, it seems to us that no one but the mayor would have the authority to make this request. Is the mayor the only member of council who, in theory, I know he didn't in this case, but would it be appropriate for me or any councillor or the mayor himself or the chair of the TTC to ask for a briefing note on a subject?
It is appropriate. I felt it would be needed, it would be a natural question in my mind. And it's the staff's role and responsibility under the City of Toronto Act to provide neutral and independent advice back to City Council members.
Okay, and on the next page of your report, paragraph 121 says, "We saw no evidence of any request to change the content of the briefing note by a member of council or their staff or any attempt to provide misleading information." So do you still stand by that statement today, that there was no evidence of any request to change the content of the briefing note by a member of council or their staff or any attempt to provide misleading information?
100%, and my team does also.
Okay, and again, through you, Mr. Chair, while you say it's appropriate for any member of council to request a briefing note, what I discovered in your report, which I didn't know before, was, and I'm going to refer, I think, to paragraph 115, if my number's correct. Nope, sorry. Number 97 on page 21, where it says, Mr. Thompson was on vacation. He advised us that on his return to work on June 27th, he reviewed the contents of the briefing note and proposed including the cost escalation to allow a more consistent comparison of its project costs to those of the Scarborough subway extension. So is it your understanding, because I remember media reports and I think our CEO was asked, well, who initiated this nefarious briefing note? There was like some, again, insinuation that something untoward had happened. Fingers were pointed at the mayor and other people. But am I correct to take from reading your report that it wasn't the mayor who asked or directed that a briefing note be created, that it was actually staff themselves? I think he's chief project manager on the file said, you know what? As part of our due diligence, we should provide this number.
Thank you, Commissioner. This decision to prepare this briefing note and the question came from a lot of different areas. You'll note that on the 27th, John Levy, the Deputy City Manager, his staff thought a question might, because there's a lot of churn, what you have to do is you have to anticipate questions, and his staff asked the question. There was a question that was raised, they thought the chair might need some information. In fact, preparing for today, Commissioner, my staff anticipated questions that would come up and prepared me with my briefing notes on the questions that might come up and the potential answers. It's a natural part of government. We did not see that a councillor requested this or the mayor requested this specifically. We did not see that. And we asked all the right questions. It came from staff, from the best of we can determine.
Okay, great. And in your report, and I think it's paragraph 104, and it's something I wrestled with as a subway advocate, I would be very frustrated because we would compare a $3.5 billion, quote, subway to a $2 billion or $1.8 billion LRT. And I would say, well, you're not really comparing apples to apples, because one is in escalated dollars, one is in, I think the number was $2010. So when staff decided to, I think I think it was actually our planning chief, Jennifer Keesmaat, felt that comparing LRT costs to subway costs, they should be compared, if you will, with the same yardstick. And they decided to escalate to an end of 2025 opening date. So did you conclude that those were reasonable and normal things that professional staff people should do?
I think my question, Commissioner, was why didn't this happen before? This should have been a question that would normally be asked. Are we comparing apples to apples?
Right, and would you say when we compare a subway in $2025 and an LRT in $2010, the just the number out there to lay people like us is actually quite substantially different, and
Well,
maybe not a true reflection of true costs.
You have to compare apples to apples, but just so that you know, in our findings, we moved the date back from 2025 back to about 2021, and we still found that it was within the range. So, but they should be apples to apples comparison of subway costs to LRT costs.
Okay, great. And Mr. Chair, just...
Yeah, let me just see if there are
Go
other
first.
questions before we go. Okay, go ahead. I don't think there are. We'll do another round for you.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, and again, I appreciate the report because I think it does shine a light and give us confidence in what our professional staff are saying to us. I believe in terms of the ridership numbers, I'm going to flip over to page 14, I believe it is. I think you did something that all good accountants do. You created a chart on page 14. And there's, again, I will say some aspersions cast on our chief planner and various staff, because in one report, I think it's paragraph 64 on page 14, and it has a side-by-side comparison of ridership numbers. And I think I'm going to focus primarily on just the ridership number, because there was a lot of insinuation that somehow our professional staff and our chief planner had, I'll call it, cooked the books by revising an estimate from 9,500 riders per peak hour to 14,000 people per peak hour. But you've laid out in this chart that though that number, in your opinion, was a reasonable number, when our chief planner put that in a report, she did it based on information she had available to her in 2013 with different population projections, just different employment projections, different transit projections, and she came to the conclusion, not the mayor, but our chief planner came to the conclusion that a reasonable number to be put in that report was 14,000. And you found nothing wrong with that, or her approach or her analysis.
So thank you, Commissioner. We did not re-audit her numbers. What we were focused on was the allegation that the information being brought forth by staff was manipulated, or they felt pressured, or there was, their expert opinion was potentially ignored. And what we found here was that there was some numbers were challenging to fully understand whether they were accurate. Even, I think earlier on, Ms. Keesmaat was wondering if there was support for the 14,000. But as time moved on, the information became more clear. So we interviewed her. We laid out exactly here what we understood her to say. We supported it with our work, and then she verified that she was not pressured, that she was not, she was addressing the information. She provided all of that as she thought was her best advice. And so we didn't find politicization or pressure on Ms. Keesmaat. We did not go and redo the numbers. The council's already received studies, information, expertise, and reports from the people who prepared that information. We just wanted to make sure that there was no politicization of staff.
Right, and through Mr. Chair, the information that our chief planner had, which was provided by Professor Eric Miller, said the ridership range was from, at that time, 13,700 to 17,700. The number of 17,700 wasn't put in the staff report. The number of 14,000 people per peak hour was put in the staff report. So at one level, our chief planner could have put the entire range in there from 13,000 to 17,700, which would have in fact perhaps given more support for a subway option. But she chose just to put in the number 14,000. So after your review, and I think you say in your report, you read thousands of pages of emails and reports and did interviews. Based on your review, our chief planner put in a report that the expected ridership was about 14,000 people per peak hour. Do you find that reasonable, even though she had higher numbers that went up to 17,700 people per peak hour?
My conclusion is that she was not influenced by political parties to come up with that number. She came up with that based on her expertise.
And through you, Mr. Chair, maybe my final question, because I think the questions asked and the accusations made were very serious. Based on your review, you're comfortable that council was given professional advice, not influenced by the mayor or any member of council, but they fulfilled the role that they have a moral and legal obligation to fulfill.
We did find that they did the best that they could do. There were errors, there were things that could have been done better, but there was no deliberate attempt to mislead council that we saw.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions to speak? Commissioner DeBaremaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Auditor General and her staff for this report. Amongst the many other very excellent reports we've had the benefit of seeing that have helped both the TTC on our second exit strategy, for example, to a myriad of departments. And I think at the end of every Auditor General's report, the city comes off better for it. I was elected in 2003. When David Miller took the stage, he raised a broom and he shook that broom. And I've been here for a decade and a half, and I have been part of and witnessed, I'll call it a culture change. We've got the accountability offices that I think have helped each and every single city councillor in this building. The roles of these departments are critical. There were very serious, and in my opinion, very unfortunate, but very serious accusations made towards the mayor, but towards Mr. Byford, towards Mr. Natero.
May he rest in peace.
May he rest in peace on the late Mr. Natero. Broadcast on national radio programs that went out to tens of thousands of people with an apology delivered in front of maybe 50 or 60 people in a council chamber. But I am actually glad to say, and it never occurred to me as a city councillor, that I in any way could have gone to our staff. I mean, it just wouldn't have entered my mind that I or any other member of this council, including the mayor, could approach Jennifer Keesmaat, Andy Byford, any one of our professional staff to try to cook the books or apply political pressure to get a result. It never entered my mind. And I'm very glad and very reassured after reading this report that when every single page, every single chapter, every single findings, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence of any wrongdoing. In fact, just the opposite. I was actually very impressed at how staff came to their conclusions, what information they provided us with, and I would submit after reading this, if staff had not provided that briefing note, there would have been more accusations. Why were staff hiding information? Why didn't staff provide this information or that information? So I think the staff did what they were supposed to do. They gave us very good professional advice. And I know as a city councillor, we're allowed to accept, reject, or amend that advice. We're not allowed to influence staff reports or try to stop getting professional advice. I appreciate the professional advice, whether I agree with it or not. That's the process. Staff give us their professional advice. We accept, reject, or amend. I'd also like to say, Mr. Chair, I felt particularly with our CEO that there were aspersions cast his way, even when something is innocent, when he was asked, I think by a media person, who asked for this briefing note? And he just off the cuff in a media scrum said, well, I can't remember who it was.
Just for accuracy, it's who asked for the cost comparison, not the briefing.
Cost comparison, yeah. And something as simple as that suddenly became this this conspiracy that there is somebody out there that was doing these things. What we find out in the auditor's report is that it was a staff member. One of the most senior staff members in this building, he's now retired, but certainly one of the most senior staff members we had in this building, made his own mind and made his own decision to say, you know what, we should include cost comparisons on this. We should compare apples to apples as best we can, because we are giving costs of a subway in 2025, or escalated dollars as we call them, and we're giving costs of an old LRT, or some people were giving costs that were very out of date. It was a very unfair comparison. So when those numbers came out and we found out that the subway and the LRT projects were very similar in cost, obviously some people didn't like that. The grenades started being thrown over at the wall. Some of them were thrown at Mr. Byford. I'm very glad to see that this report demonstrates to us that we can have complete faith in all of our senior staff. I think it's a very good report. I think the accusation at the beginning of this, or the genesis of this, saying that this one background, this one briefing note could somehow have influenced the entire council, even 3 years before it was created, is just sour grapes by people who can't accept the fact that this issue has been to council on 9 different occasions, 10 now, and on 10 occasions, we voted for the subway 10 times in a row. So that's the political will of council. I've got the reports from 2013 that, again, have side-by-side comparisons. What's the cost of the subway? What's the cost of the LRT? What's the ridership of the subway? What's the ridership of the SRT? What's the route that we can take here? What's the route that we can take there? We've looked at it over and over and over again. I think we've landed on the right decision, and I'm glad that in council doing that, our staff, independent of us, have done an amazing professional job. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll move oh, sorry, you're going to speak? No, go ahead. Yep.
Thanks. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the Auditor General for her report, and also to, I mean, it's no secret, I didn't vote for the Scarborough subway extension, but it's irrelevant. I mean, I feel this report actually vindicates our CEO, and I'm glad for that, because I think that the TTC CEO and the TTC staff are actually very professional, and when aspersions are cast on their integrity, I think it's not just for the TTC, it's for the entire bureaucracy of the City of Toronto. So I'm glad to see that he was vindicated, and let's move on.
Thank you. I will move that we adopt the Auditor General's recommendations. And with that, I will less speak than just, I guess, read some of her findings, really verbatim, maybe the odd one with emphasis, but no editorializing. Our main findings are, we found no evidence of any lack of integrity on the part of CEO Andy Byford or other TTC personnel in its preparation. I'll repeat that one. We found no evidence of any lack of integrity on the part of CEO Byford or other TTC personnel. We found no evidence of a systematic problem of the politicization of staff by elected officials, including the mayor and his office, in relation to the development of the ridership numbers and the preparation and distribution of the note. I'll also note, we found no indication that ridership forecast numbers were manipulated. Keesmaat also advised us that there was no politicization of herself or the plan division staff to adjust the number. We conclude there was no political influence applied to Keesmaat to adjust the numbers. We found no evidence of staff trying to mislead council or politicization of staff. During our review, we analyzed thousands of pages of emails, reports, and interviews. The preparation of the briefing note appears to be consistent with staff operating in a neutral and normal manner. We saw no evidence of political interference or any attempt to purposely provide misleading information. Had we found evidence that a member of council tried to politically influence staff to change the briefing note or to mislead council, the Auditor General would have referred the matter to the Integrity Commissioner. No such evidence was found. No referral has been made. Again, our findings are, there is no evidence of any lack of integrity on the part of Andy Byford, CEO of the TTC, or other TTC personnel in the preparation of this briefing note. We did not find any evidence of a systematic problem of the politicization of staff by elected officials, including the mayor and his office, in relation to the development of the ridership numbers in the briefing note and in the preparation and distribution of the briefing note. Third, even if construction of the LRT could have begun earlier than was mentioned in the briefing note, in our opinion, the potential difference between the TTC's figures and the new cost was within an acceptable range for cost estimates at that stage of completion of the project. And for anyone who might have missed it the first or second or third time I read it, there was no evidence of any lack of integrity on the part of Andy Byford, CEO of the TTC, or other TTC personnel. With that, I will ask for a vote. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move back to item number 5, and we do have a deputy on that. I think Alan Yule's here and probably close to being ready to go on the King Street pilot monitoring and evaluation. Can you message me where you're at? Just text me. Is that 3? 803. 1504? 1584.
The King 504 streetcar is not only the busiest surface route in the city, it's the third busiest line in the entire city. The much debated and maligned SRT or Line 3 doesn't even crack the top 5. The success of this pilot project will be based on good and complete data being included in the evaluation process. As you know, the pilot project is on King Street from Bathurst to Jarvis. Remember, King Street goes from the end of Roncesvalles to the Don River. The initial study area included from Dufferin to Don River. This report suggests that we look at compliance and enforcement, but only at intersections and curbside and only in the pilot area. Remember, the objective of the pilot project is to improve transit along the entire of King Street. Most people know about rush hour parking restrictions on transit corridors, including King Street. What most people don't know is that King Street already has priority lanes on it. From Dufferin to Parliament, the center lanes are restricted to streetcars and taxis only during rush hour. While there has been progress on removing illegally parked cars from along King Street and other routes, to my knowledge, the transit taxi lanes are not being enforced along King Street. From last year's July 11th TTC board meeting, I believe I drove home the point that laws don't get followed unless people feel that there's a chance that they will get caught and they will get a ticket. Enforcement of parking during rush hours has improved greatly over the past couple of years. Just adding new rules to King Street without enforcing the current rules won't fix King. We can use this pilot project to educate Toronto drivers about all the rules on King Street, including the Dufferin from Dufferin to Parliament transit restrictions. Thank you.
Yeah, short presentation. Any questions for Mr. Yule? Mr. Byers?
Thank you. I'm not sure, I want to make sure I understand your key point. Are you saying that the pilot project should be expanded, or are you saying we have the rules already, so before you go and do a pilot, enforce them? Just maybe if you could clearly say...
We have the pilot project, that's ready to go. I have no issues with that. I'm just saying, on top of the pilot project, we should be letting people know that there are also rules along King Street that aren't being followed right now. Combining the two will improve the transit on King Street.
Got it, thank you.
I wanted to advise the board that there are some slides available from city staff and from TTC staff. I thought the report was excellent, but if you feel the need for further information, it's available to you to see, so I'm in your hands as to what we do. Sure. Yeah, we have dealt with it at previous meetings, but if you've got questions that are live, why don't we do it? People are here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the report mentions that you'll get business retail sales data quarterly, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us more about that data and how you'll analyze it. And I'm not sure who I'm speaking to, but through the chair and whoever.
Commissioner, I'll ask Kirsten, the Chief Customer Officer, to take carriage of these questions.
Okay.
So actually, on the information,
Kirsten, there's someone sitting beside you. They should introduce themselves.
Yes, no, I'm just going to introduce her. This is Jacqueline Hayward-Galati. She's from the City Transportation Department, so she can speak specifically to the retail data.
On the retail data through the chair, we will be using Moneris data, similar to the data that was collected for the Bloor pilot and recently released. So we'll be looking at point-of-sale data for retail transactions within the pilot area.
So perhaps you could speak to how you're going to analyze that data.
The provider of that data would be providing us with trend analysis of the amount spent within the pilot area compared to other areas of the city, as well as the transaction size.
Okay, the report also mentions quarterly pedestrian mid-block counts. So parts of King Street have become very vibrant. I think it might be helpful to have a deeper understanding of changes in pedestrian activity as a result of this pilot. I was wondering, are we doing enough to understand this, and what more could we do?
Through you, Chair, we will be doing turning movement counts at intersections and mid-block locations to understand pedestrian volumes through the pilot area. So we do want to understand how that changes through the pilot time.
Okay. I guess it's early days.
I wanted to congratulate Ms. Galati on the work that I thought transportation did using Moneris as a data technique. I thought it was very clever, and I think when good work is done by the public service, it should be acknowledged. The motion we have in front of us, unless there's any questions, I don't think there will be because we've had this before the board previously, is endorse this report, direct staff to provide a performance status report for all the key performance indicators related to transit on the King Street pilot project as part of the TTC CEO's monthly report to the board. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Campbell, all in favor? Done. Next item is number 7, which is the Auditor General's report on the accounts payable functions at the TTC. We have 2 deputants. I'd indicate to board members that this report was extensively reviewed by the Audit Committee at our last meeting. So I don't think, does anybody feel the need for a presentation? Okay. So then we have 2 deputants, Ms. Fry and Ms. Thompson. I've got them listed. Scratch that? Oh, that's very kind of you. That doesn't happen much. So if we could, somebody move approval of the report? Mr. Lalonde, all in favor? Done. Last item is advancing fare integration.
15 and 17.
17's left.
Oh, 17's left too? Okay.
But 15's next.
So 15's next, advancing fare integration. We have Mr. Yule. And I congratulate you, Mr. Yule, on your economy in your last presentation. I hope you're as focused this time.
Soon people transferring from GO or UP will get a $1.50 discount on their TTC fares. While this is good, I would like to point out it's still the lowest co-fare discount in the GTHA. The discount in other GTA agencies ranges from $1.70 to $2.80. This means the co-fare is as low as 60 cents to $1 in the GTHA, which makes our discount 50% higher than what the other ones are. From last year's joint meeting of the TTC and Metrolinx board, we know that transfer between agencies in the 905 is done at nominal cost to the passenger. The City of Brampton allows passengers on its system to finish their trip on Brampton Transit vehicles if they have a valid transfer from MyWay, YRT Viva, Oakville, Burlington, Hamilton Street Railway, and even Durham Region Transit. But we don't roll that way at the TTC. We want all of our money all of the time. Page 16 of this presentation lists some of the challenges to fare integration between 905 and 416 systems. The biggest challenge for smooth integration between these agencies is that 905 agencies are operating on time-based transfers. The TTC does not. It's not just the 905. Every other major transit agency across Canada uses time-based transfers. They use it because time-based transfers save them money, it increases revenue, and leads to better overall customer experience for the passengers. Only the TTC uses this time-based directional transit transfer system. This is more of a 1950s model than a 2017 one. From my discussions with frontline Presto staff, many of the problems with Presto on the TTC are directly related to the TTC's insistence on this archaic trip-based directional transfer policy. After all, Presto was set up to make transit easier in Ontario in the 21st century. Unfortunately, the TTC insists on using a transfer policy from last century. From the April 27th meeting of the TTC and Metrolinx board meeting last year, there's 2 things we noticed. The first thing is 905 agencies seem to have little or no issues with passengers transferring from one of their transit agencies to another 905 agency. The biggest impediment to fare integration seems to be in this room. From that same meeting, we know that there are about 42 million 905-416 cross-border trips a year. Historically, it's been the attitude in this building that those nasty 905ers are a fiscal drain on the mighty 416. So let's be clear about those 905ers. They are coming to our city to work at businesses in Toronto that pay Toronto municipal taxes, or they are coming into our city to shop at businesses that pay Toronto municipal taxes or go to shows or whatever. Part of making the City of Toronto business friendly is making sure that businesses in Toronto can get their employees or customers to and from their locations. The most cost-effective way for the city to do that is through public transit. Also from this report, we know that there are 42 million cross-border trips a year. I already mentioned that. So to make the math simple for everyone to understand, if the TTC actually joins the 21st century and goes to a time-based transfer like the rest of the country, using this $1.50 split model between GO and TTC trips, of those 42 million trips, 21 million of those trips would be at the full $3 fare, and $20 million would be at the reduced fare. Those $20 million trips costing us more sounds like a whole lot, except last year the TTC moved over 500 million passengers. So less than 4% of our customers will be at a higher cost than they are at now. And yes, tax dollars are being paid to fund this extra cost. Taxes come from employers that get some of their employees from the 905. Taxes come from malls, retailers, restaurants, theaters, etc., that also have customers from outside the city. The Eaton Centre gets most of its traffic from the TTC. Not all those TTC passengers getting off at Queen or Dundas come from Toronto. Other area codes get their customers from the TTC as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I got your point here. It was your usual subtle way. I'm curious, though, about this time-based transfer, and I should know this, but is it 2 hours in other jurisdictions, or is it some other number?
It ranges from agency to agency. In the GTHA, it's 2 hours. In Ottawa, it's 90 minutes. Halifax is 90 minutes. In Vancouver, it's 90 minutes.
And how are they able, you've made the assertion here that actually generates more revenue for them, which I must say intuitively, I thought it would be a cost, because people could frankly move around and within a time limit without paying an extra fare. How are they able to ascertain with certainty that it actually generates additional revenue?
From an operational perspective, Mississauga and My Way Transit prints one transfer a day. That's it. Shows the date and they tear it off just at the time that expires. The TTC spends money to print over 100 different transfers. So there's an operational cost in that. Increased revenue means if now I'm going to go, it just takes me, I can go and get my milk at the corner store by getting on the streetcar, getting off the streetcar, and coming back again instead of getting out the car and doing that same trip.
Got it. Thank you.
Any further questions of the deputy? No. Any questions of staff? Councillor Mahavik, and then Councillor.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very interested in, I'm supportive of this step in the process, but I'm really wondering, oh, there you are, Arthur, where this is all going. Correct me if I'm wrong, we have a motion, do we not, at the commission, that we will not be, that we are not, as a commission, by policy, supportive of a fare by distance. Is that correct?
I believe that we have been working closely with Metrolinx on looking at all the implications that fare by distance would have on the TTC to see whether that could be made to work. And I believe that part of the next steps that Metrolinx have laid out is to do further work, detailed work, on what the operational implications of that would be.
I see. Okay, maybe between now and next time, some research could be done, because I'm pretty sure that we have a very clear, unambiguous motion that directed staff from the commission that fare by distance is not something that we would consider, period, which would be a different way of approaching, to have you approach Metrolinx staff in your various conversations. So we'll do that. We'll together do that bit of research. And so I'm on page 23, and this is the one that kind of concerns me as to where this is going. Are we to assume that this is a four-step process? That they're basically, this is the beginning of the hook, and eventually they're going to get us down to fare by distance? First, they're going to start with modifying the existing system, then to zones, then to hybrid, then to fare by distance. Is that their game plan?
Sorry, which page are you looking at?
23 of this slide deck.
So this slide lays out the different concepts that are being and have been analysed by the consultants who have been hired by Metrolinx to carry out detailed analysis of each of these different options of how fare integration could be implemented within GTHA.
So one does not cascade into the other, they're just four different options?
No, they are all separate.
Is there a bias, cutting to the chase, is there a bias, is there a desire on the part of Metrolinx to have us go with the fare by distance model? Noting that Toronto was in a zoned area years ago, and there was great joy when we got rid of that system years ago, and there'd be a great reluctance on our people, I think.
Is that a question or a?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Noting, I said the word noting at the beginning.
Well, I think you could say it in your remarks.
So I think it'd be fair to say that it is one of the concepts outlined here that they are very keen to delve into further, and it's clear from the assessment that was done by their consultants that that concept has the greatest degree of flexibility to enable future changes to fares and potentially therefore greater opportunity to increase ridership than some of the other concepts.
Okay, I'll make sense.
I missed a deputant whom I apologize to, is Mr. Brent. So Bob, why don't you start your presentation? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair Heisey, and Commissioners for the opportunity to depute today on the TDC's Advancing Fare Integration Report. As you know, over the past 2 years, beginning in September 2015, I've appeared before the Commission, the Budget Committee, Audit and Risk Management Committees to depute on the need to market the TTC more effectively, particularly MetroPass, as it was likely TTC rides and passenger revenue would not grow or, in fact, decline. In fact, the TTC rides have flatlined at $538 million over the past 3 years, 2015, 16, 17, while in 2016, passenger revenue is $49 million below the annual operating budget, the largest deficit in TTC history, despite flat rides in a growing economy. Needless to say, I am really looking forward to staff's ridership growth strategy report at next month's commission, as without ride and passenger revenue growth, the TTC is not financially sustainable without ever larger operating subsidies. I'm going to offer the following observations on today's Advancing Fare Integration Report, with particular concern for the MetroPass advocacy, if not their obsession with arbitrarily imposing fare by distance on TDC and GTA public transit. And Commissioner Havoc, if you'd like to ask me the same question just asked Mr. Borkwood, I'd be happy to give you my take on it about bias. So there is no benefit of any model or BCA data to justify it, and clear Q 2015 factbook data that will make the TDC and other GTA public transit less convenient, more expensive, the fares less obvious and complex, and likely lead to reduced rides and passenger revenue. With respect to the proposal, the TDC Go co-fare will have negligible ride impact on the TDC rides revenue and even less on the GTA public transit fare integration. You just have to look at the $60 GTA Go TDC sticker. I think it achieved 74 purchases a month and 882 over a year. So when you have a requirement to make 2 purchases, it doesn't include 50% of rides, which are MetroPass. This is not going to do anything noticeable to either the TDC or fare integration. Metrolinx, their CPO has 3 times promised the board, the Metrolinx board, detailed GTA fare integration sample, fare by distance fares, without delivering them to the board. The Metrolinx GTA Fare Integration Committee has decided to impose fare by distance on GTA local public transit, which accounts for 91% of the rides, despite the fact that only the GTA transit, only GO Transit, with 9% of rides uses this fare strategy. And as I said before, this fare strategy will make GTA local public transit fares less convenient, more expensive, less transparent, and time-consuming. And in fact, looking across North America, there isn't one major North American public transit, local public transit agency that uses fare by distance, and I think you should draw your own conclusions. Metrolinx has failed to publicly disclose the results of the Steers-Davie-Gleave model simulations of fare by distance fare integration, leading me at least to infer that they don't support the fare by distance strategy. And finally, consistent with Mr. Yule's deputation, a 2-hour time-based transfer remains a simpler, cheaper, more convenient fare integration strategy for the TDC and GTA public transit. And I think that's it. Now, before I'd just like to add that at one of the audit committee meetings, Mr. Heisey, his vice chair, asked me, is this your personal opinion, what will happen, or is this, do you have facts to back it up? And Commissioner Byers asked, well, what would you like us to do? And I'd ask you to engage your curiosity. Don't be afraid to challenge staff if something doesn't sound right to you. Trust your gut. And right now, Commissioner Mahavik has a very strong gut. He's heading in the right direction and asking the questions. And if you, seeing how I've got 30 seconds, so this is the CUDA data. You can see that GO is 9.1% of fares. TDC is 66% of, sorry, 70%. Well, I'm getting confused.
2015.
TDC is 75% of GTA public transit, GO is 9%. You might remember the co-fare test. Kalinowski says price matters. That's the conclusion of the sticker test. UPX.
I'll give you another 20 seconds, okay?
UPX had 9.7% capacity utilization after a $456 million expenditure. This is the GTA data in detail. I'll have the update. Vice Chair Heisey, I just want to let you know that I've done the homework. I've got the numbers, and I'll have updated 2016 data at the end of the month when CUDA releases their fact. One last note is that York Region has eliminated zone fares. They've gone to flat fares throughout the region as of July of 2017. So everyone is, all GTA has local flat fares and
thanks very much.
2-hour time-based transfers.
Yes.
So just so I'm clear in Reader's Digest format, you're okay with this report? You think there is a ridership wisdom in having a discounted fare if you're going from GO to the TTC or from the TTC to GO? You're okay with this report?
It's inconsequential. It's insignificant, just like the TDC times 2 fare is the GO TDC fare, just like just like the sticker was. It's a political necessity to justify the Minister of Transportation's press release to show that they're doing something on fare integration when effectively they're really doing nothing.
Okay, I want to probe that further, but I'll do it offline because it doesn't make intuitive sense how if I offer a half-price fare for when I get onto the other system, that to me is a price incentive that should work. But you know what? I don't want to ask a question on that. But you are saying, okay, we'll do that offline because I have limited time. But you are saying that are you saying in your comments that the way to go is 2-hour transferability, that's a way to go, but you're not supportive of, and you say the data backs you up, of a fare integration that would be fare by distance?
Yes, and this is a simpler chart. If you look at across Canada, which I haven't done, Vancouver has zones, York Region had zones, GO has fare by distance, Montreal has flat fares, TDC has flat fares. If you look at their rides per vehicle hour, you look at their rides per capita, flat fares outperform zones and fare by distance. So it really is contrary. The mistake that Metrolinx has made is they're not setting an objective, let's get our modal share for GTA public transit up to 33% to guide fare integration. What they're saying is we must need fare integration, despite the fact the fare integration strategy they're choosing will actually depress TTC rides, which are 75% of the TTC.
Do you think that, because they do fare by distance, GO does, that's driving TTC and I guess other authorities to go fare by distance as well?
Well, it's the tail wagging the dog fare strategy. I mean, why would, wouldn't you rather increase the rides of 91% of GTA public transit, which is local public transit, rather than force a higher cost? GO has a $7.31 average fare versus $2 on the TTC. The cost is much higher at $11.36 versus $3 on the TTC. And the answer to your question you asked Mr. Borkwood is, when you have spare capacity, if you design your fare strategy correctly, you'll just fill up your vehicles every hour, every day. It's, if that's hard to understand, think of a restaurant. As head of marketing for Pizza Hut, I had delivery, carry-out, dine-in, and lunch business. So I had to devise a fare strategy or a pricing strategy that, basically filled the restaurant at all times. And that's what you want to do with a fare strategy. Your 905 public transit has a RC ratio between 35% and 40%, which means their buses are operating empty off-peak. The TDC at a 70% RC ratio also has spare capacity. What I'd ask you to suggest to Metrolinx is run tests on holidays, run tests on Sundays, try a 2-hour time-based transfer and get some real data on what the impact is. Don't decide based on a London-based model that fare by distance is right for you, where all the Canadian data and all the GTA data says fare by distance will depress rides and passenger revenue. You're already in an unsustainable situation, and if you go to fare by distance, it'll even get worse.
Last question?
Okay. One more, but I think we need to cut it then.
So just to play the devil's advocate, do you think I have more of a downtown ward, my people go downtown, they're going to get a cheaper fare. So let's say just for fun that they get a $2 fare. Why should my people pay a $3 fare to help Glenn's people pay a $4 fare?
It all comes down to vehicle utilization. There's always been an argument that democracy, and Jennifer Keysbat at one point in time said equity may mean we have to go to a fare by distance strategy. And I whispered to her in her ear in that presentation, on a 2-hour transfer would also be equity. It would give the benefit of a MetroPass to an individual purchaser who can't afford a MetroPass. So what you have to do, Commissioner Mihevik, is look at the balance sheet and say which fare strategy gives you the best rides and best passenger revenue, and the difference between your costs and that revenue determines your operating subsidy. So at all times you want your fare strategy to maximize rides, maximize passenger revenue, and offering a cheaper fare because you're closer does the exact opposite as you see with fare by distance, where you do get a cheaper fare, but it doesn't produce the same revenue as a flat fare does, which is simpler, cheaper, and more convenient and easier to understand.
I'm going to cut it there. I thought it was very interesting presentation. Councillor Fragadakis, I think you're next. I know. And there's no deputants left I'm aware of.
Oh, okay.
And the next speaker after Councillor Fragadakis is Commissioner Byers.
I have questions.
Yeah.
So maybe
Sorry,
just-
questions. Yeah.
Okay. So on page 3 of the report, it advises that any potential costs associated with reversing the Presto technology requirements will be cost shared between Metrolinx and the TTC. Estimated cost to be shared is currently $500,000, and the parties will discuss the details of the cost share at a future date. $500,000 seems kind of high to me. Do we have any kind of breakdown of those costs?
Not at this time, no, we don't. And just to be clear, that cost is purely for reversing the implementation of the proposed fare discount.
Okay. So there are still no discounts for customers who use 905 local services and the TTC, nor for TTC monthly pass holders who use GO, correct?
Correct.
What are the challenges involved for implementing them?
So for implementing a similar discount between the 905 and the TTC requires the similar technology changes
Software?
to Presto, yep. So the changes that are being, are proposed to be made, subject to this report being approved and agreement being signed, would be this, my understanding is exactly the same technology. It would just require implementing a fare for those agencies.
Are there any funding challenges? Like, for example, do we know how much a similar discount for 905 TTC customers would cost?
So we've done some high-level analysis, and that is the total cost of that initiative would be between 20 and 30 million, of which the TTC's portion of that would be half of that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Commissioner Byers.
So I had some questions on the term sheet as well, some of them including cost, but my first, in section 2 of the term sheet, it says the discount would be available within a transfer window between the two systems, and what is that? So transfer between GO and TTC, how long, is that a time-based transfer? Is it, how long do they have to get on the system to be eligible for that $1.50 discount?
The transfer window varies between agencies. Most agencies, as you have heard already, have within the GTHA, have a 2-hour transfer window. Okay. The 905 agencies have a 2-hour time-based transfer window. Within our transfer rules, we also have 2 hours alongside other rules that the other agencies do not have. And for GO and Up Express, it's a 3-hour window.
Okay. I also want to talk about the cost, because it does feel like we're potentially bearing more than we should. So, and this is where it gets canceled. So in section 8, this is the 500,000. So the agreement says if the initiative is ended, then there'll be cost sharing on that 500,000. And it strikes me that we can frankly say two things as options. Number one, if it's terminated, maybe the cost should be borne by the terminator. So in other words, if GO, because the cap on this is that Metrolinx has a revenue cap. My sense is if this is very successful and it goes above the cap, they'll be the ones who want to terminate it, more than us. I can't see why we'd want to terminate it. So something to think about. At the very least, maybe the terminator share the cost, or frankly, this whole program is a Metrolinx program. I think we could easily argue that, sorry, you're terminating it, or it's your program, you pay the cost for ending it. Something to think about. I mean, I know it won't be easy. This will be in the kind of end of agreement phase, but just something for you to consider. Last question, in section 13, it says that either party may terminate the agreement for the other's default on 60 days' notice. And I didn't quite understand that. If someone's defaulting, 60 days actually feels like a long time. I don't know whether they're defaulting on operations or what the default is, so just curious about that.
So 60 days basically refers to the time it takes to make the technical changes to back out of the initiative.
I see.
So from that moment, that point, that's the earliest is that 60 days.
Okay.
And Commissioner, just on the first point, I've been clear from the start that the TTC is not to be left out of pocket on this. So I think your point about the terminating party is well made. We certainly do not. We're not going to accept a position where we get left out of pocket on this. No way.
Councillor Campbell.
So I'm going to just follow up on that out-of-pocket comment. So as I understand it, when a GO user taps onto the TTC, they will pay $1.50 less a fare. Is that correct? A reduced fare, a fare less reduced by $1.50?
Adults, that's correct.
Right, immediately, correct?
Correct.
So why are we agreeing to that? Why not have the passenger pay the full fare and then have Metrolinx remit the $1.50 to the Presto card holder immediately? Because they can certainly do that. So then the TTC's not out the cash. 50,000 rides a day, we're out $1.50 for every adult fare. Those are all adult fares. And then we have to go back to them and get the money. So why not have them pay the full fare, and yet the rider knows the money will be remitted to them through their Presto account? Has that been discussed?
I believe it's to do with the way that the Presto system is able to deliver this.
You know what, my feeling tells me that the Presto system, you know what, they could figure that out. So that's just food for thought. I would not want to be saying to Metrolinx, you know, we're going to chase this money. I would want them to look after the transaction costs.
And just to be clear, the initiative.
A little less customer friendly, but the customer then it's up to the customer to make sure, the customers to make sure that they've received the discount every time they go, and not to have the TTC go back and circulate and get that money.
So the initiative, what is put forward here is consistent with how it works with the other 905 agencies and Go, and that consistency is quite, I think, important from a customer perspective and from a communications perspective, so that they understand exactly what the proposition is.
This is a new system that they're bringing in right now across the province, right?
So what is proposed here is something that is in place today between the 905 agencies and Go already, and it works in exactly the same way on the Presto system, and this is proposing that same initiative is applied to the TTC system.
You finish? Yep. Okay. Any speakers, or is this a second round? Okay.
Arthur, I notice on page, page 5, that students, students, post-secondary and seniors are also a buck and a half. I don't see any category for people who will benefit from the fair equity strategy that is being implemented in 2018. How's that going to be handled?
So they would receive the same.
Excuse me.
They would pay the same single fare of $1.50.
Is there a reason why it's not included here?
So there are lots of kind of other smaller kind of fare groups that we could have included, but we just included the main ones.
So they'll only get a 50-cent discount.
A 55-cent discount, correct.
Okay, and then the last question is, maybe this is to the CEO. I'm kind of leading the witness. Do you not think that we need a TTC approach to fares before we go into the Metrolinx conversation? We have not had as a commission, or with of course with staff, an approach to fares that we have as our own that we bring to the negotiating table. Do you not think we need one?
Well, the trouble is you can't really act just in isolation when we have signed up to Presto, which is a multi-agency, GTA-wide enabler, if you like, or medium. So I don't think we can forever continue to say we will just do our own thing. And in any case, we did not initiate this. This came up as a provincial initiative to which we had to respond, or we would have not been able to benefit from it. So, yeah, maybe in the ideal world, yes, but that's not always how life works.
But in this world, we're like the big. It is one of those. Is it not one of those cases of the tail wagging the dog? So, 20% of the rides outside of 416, that's them. We're the big fish in the pond, and yet it seems to me that the whole direction of this is being driven by the cross-border needs and the long-distance commute needs of Go, rather than where the bulk of the rides are in the City of Toronto.
Well, I mean, the initiative did come from the province, that's right. That's not to say we're not having discussions with Metrolinx about the broader fare integration strategy, but this got there before our thinking and was finalised on that point, ultimately.
So my last question here is, at some point, would it not be helpful for us, like if there is, and it seems that Arthur sees some wisdom in a kind of fare by distance model. Maybe there is. I don't know. All my antennas go up. My gut starts to turn. if there is some wisdom, I'd certainly like to know what it is. And as such, I don't know if I need a private briefing or a group briefing or a public conversation. but
I'm going to
somehow
limit this to another 20
I'm wondering
seconds.
whether we do not need a real wholesome discussion on this topic, and I'm wondering whether you're prepared to have it come to the commission sooner, like very soon, not at the end when all the decisions are made with Metrolinx, but very soon so that we can assess whether we're taking the right approach as the TTC.
So if soon means Q1 2018, given we've got 62 days to go, and I keep saying, please don't pile any more on us, then I can agree to that.
Do you need a motion to that effect?
No, we'll do it.
Okay.
I'm going to hold you to it.
I think that's it for questions. Councillor Campbell.
To speak?
Yes.
No, I don't see that, I don't really see a big advantage to the TTC in this integrated fare system. I mean, I can see that we have to do it. It will benefit other Ontarians. It says that we might get an extra 1,000 rides a day on top of the 50,000 that are already coming in. But if I was involved in the negotiations, I would not for a moment agree to the way that the fare, the discounted fare, is being remitted to the passenger. And I would say it's got to be our way, or, you figure out a better way to do it so that we're not out of pocket, because we're out of pocket immediately, and we're going to wind up having to chase that cash. We're going to have to assign people to make sure that we're getting the right amount of money back. The other way, it would all be Presto, Metrolinx figuring out how many rides are crossing over in TTC. They remit it back to the customer at the point where they're already paying for their card. So those are it's my 2 cents worth.
Do you have a motion you want to put?
No, I don't have a motion. No, I'm just to speak. So Andy, here's what I'm having to say. And I mean, I think that there's not a lot to be gained here for the TTC. And so any terms or that are looking to extract more from us in terms of termination or not complying or whatever, I would just say that's not on, because this was initiated by a provincial government that's trying to get reelected. That's clear. They waited till this point in time to do it. I think it's worthwhile. I think it makes sense. I think transit riders do need a break, so I support the initiative, but I don't think it should be on the back of the TTC.
Before you speak, Councillor Mahavik, why don't we put your motion up so you can describe what you'd like to get to? Everybody can see it and decide if they want to speak to it.
Speak to it. So this is a very interesting report, and you know what, I support it. I actually don't agree with one of the deputants who said that this isn't going to be helpful. If we assume the premise that that ridership, one of the strongest tools to define ridership is the level of the fare, then reducing the fare is going to increase ridership. I think that's a good thing, so I support this, the direction. I do not support the idea of just having it automatically discounted on the person's Presto card for this reason, and that's what this motion really attempts to address. Willy-nilly, what the provincial government has done by virtue of this is it has re-entered the operating subsidy ballgame. That's good news for us. And that's what number one tries to do. It says, thanks, folks. You've now re-entered operating subsidy. Now we're just debating what the range is. You've done it for this. Let us encourage you to enter into other operating subsidies for Wheel-Trans, for the regular system, perhaps for the transit fare equity that's coming down the pipe, perhaps for for 2-hour transfer. There are other places that we want the province's support and participation. So that's what this motion tries to do. So for that, I'm also thankful for this report and the good work that staff has done. Lastly, I do really, I take and I will hold them to it, of course, with folks' support, for having a TTC conversation on the future of fares in the City of Toronto for the TTC. I do think, I certainly feel that that we're in a situation where it is the tail wagging the dog, that the smaller systems around the City of Toronto and GO is driving the agenda around fares. And we need to figure out a way to either be convinced that that's the way it should go, and I'm open to that if the data supports that, or pushing back and saying, no, you know what, we actually have a pretty good fare system now. And you know what, my residents actually win if we go fare by distance. Councillor de Beermaker and the outer suburbs, they're going to lose if we go by fare by distance, because my residents have shorter trips, his residents have longer trips, they're going to be paying a lot more.
And worse service.
And poorer service. Are we in this together as TTC patrons across the city of Toronto, or are we going to be balkanized by different prices for different folks in different geographic areas of Toronto? Maybe there's a reason for that. I don't know what it is. I'd like to find out what it is, if there is a good reason, or push back in a different direction and give direction to staff to push back in a different direction. So I look forward to that conversation.
Thanks very much. Next speaker. Yep, okay.
I just want clarification on the motion that asking us to do something that the province is not actually doing, because you're saying they've re-engaged the financial subsidy of operating costs to the TTC. I don't see how that, I'm confused because I don't see how that happens when no money's coming to the TTC.
Yes.
Money's going to riders from outside of Toronto. Riders.
No, if just to clarify, if you look
Or
at...
Or TTC riders, not the TTC.
If you look at the top of page 2, financial impact, the provincial support has been identified as $7.15 million in year 1 and $18.4 million in year 2. They're going to write a check for us for those two amounts in year 1, 2, and year 3 as well.
Money we would have had anyway.
Yeah, so...
From the riders.
That's right. So
now we're
this
going
is...
to get a check from the province.
But you're asking us to write a letter that's not factually correct, because they are not contributing to the operating costs of the TTC. So anyway, with that said, I won't support that motion.
Any other speakers? Any other speakers? Yeah, there's another motion I want to put up, just so you can see that. Mine is less assertive. Mine's trying to get a path to go forward on the report itself. I don't think anybody will be upset about that. We just like to have a timeline for reporting back as to what's going on, because this is so important. I'll speak to this briefly. When I first got on this board, I was a big believer in fare by distance. I just thought that user pay, I thought it made sense. But I've been educated by people who know more than me about systems outside of Toronto, for example, London, which has no fare by distance for buses and only has fare by distance for the subway, which kind of, I don't know where we should land on this, but I used to think full fare by distance makes sense, and I'm not sure that it does now. But I do think it's an important discussion we're going to have. We've been waiting for a report on this issue, I think from before Councillor Mihevc got on the board, and Councillor Campbell. And I think it's been awaiting these conversations with Metrolinx. But I do think we have to make sure we're not the tail wagging the dog as well, that we have our own view and that not get determined just by sort of a senior level of government because of a subsidy. And I'm very interested in Councillor Campbell's comments about it not operating as a subsidy. I think that's interesting. I think he might be right. So those are my comments, and we'll vote first on Councillor Mihevc's motion. Opposed? I think that fails because it's a tie. On the motion that I put forward for Q18 discussions, all in favor? Done. All in favor? Done. So we're now item 17, which I think Councillor Mihevc held. Do you have a motion, Joe?
I'll let it go.
You'll let it go? So do you want to move the recommendation?
Sure. No, I don't. I'm not.
Okay. Commissioner Byers, all in favor of the recommendation for 17? Done. I think that's it. Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn? Thank you very much. Thank you for the advice.
Sorry, bye. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. No. I never take it personally. At the end of the day, I think we've got to do a group think. And so I have to think, what did I say wrong that I didn't convince you?
and that will elevate the conversation.